This is Port of Seattle Commission President John Creighton calling to order the regular meeting of the Port of Seattle Commission for June 28th, 2016. The time is now 1:12 p.m. and I was really excited that we were going to start on time today, and we didn't quite make it, but I guess we're more timely than usual, so thank you for bearing with us. We are meeting in the conference center of Sea-Tac Airport. Present with me today are Commissioners Albro, Bowman, Fellman, and Gregoire. This meeting is being digitally recorded and may be viewed or heard at any time on the Port's website and may be rebroadcast by King County Television. Now please stand for the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. All right, Mr. Fick.
Commission President Creighton, thank you. Just a few minutes ago, before our meeting officially began, Commissioners, you welcomed many of our high school summer interns to the Port. Under your leadership, the Port's increased its commitment to preparing youth for high-demand and high-value careers by more than tripling the number of interns this summer at the Port of Seattle. We have a record year with 70 high school interns and 35 college intern and graduate interns. We'll kick off our meeting today with we're going to kick off our meeting today with a brief presentation about Sea-Tac becoming the first U.S. airport to earn the Salmon Safe certification. We're really proud of this achievement, which is received for our environmental work to protect streams and salmon migrations. Also on our agenda today are several items related to addressing Sea-Tac Airport's record growth and our forecasted future growth. First, we'll hold our fourth Commission Public Roundtable examining topics and hearing from stakeholders about developing the airport to accommodate passenger and cargo growth. This roundtable focuses on environmental sustainability and growth. Later in the meeting, we'll be briefing you on adding 2 international gates in our baggage improvement program. You'll also be asked to authorize 2 projects related to infrastructure upgrades. Also in today's meeting, representatives from the City of Seattle will brief us about their draft freight master plan and discuss freight mobility, which is important for so many businesses, large and small, throughout our community. Also of significance on your agenda today is a motion to support the Washington Won't Discriminate campaign and joined hundreds of community, labor, and business leaders in opposition to Initiative 1515. Second, I have a few announcements before our meeting begins. The Port recently received Highline School District's highest honor for preparing the district students for life after high school, the Outstanding Career Partner Award. Highline is the airport's school district covering the communities of Burien, Des Moines, Normandy Park, Sea-Tac, Boulevard Park, and White Center. The Port was singled out for many internships we provide, our career exploration events, and our award-winning partnership with Raceback Aviation High School. We aren't resting on our successes, however. This fall, the Port will host Highline School District students for our first public safety career exploration event, which will include our fire, police, and emergency preparedness departments. Separately, our airport customer service improvement security lines. I'm pleased to share with you our most recent innovation at the airport for travelers. In this slide, when a traveler first enters the terminal near the ticket counters, they will now see a display of checkpoint wait times next to the display of the flight information. Slide 2 shows what it looks like from a distance next to the flight boards. I want to recognize our IT staff and airport teams for pulling this together so quickly to make the traveler's experience at Sea-Tac more pleasant and less stressful. That concludes my report.
Thank you. So next up on the agenda, we have a presentation on our Salmon Safe certification at Seattle Tacoma International Airport. And we are honored today to have with us a former colleague, Commissioner Bill Bryant, if you would come up as well.
Commissioners, thank you for your time, and it's a pleasure to be here, and I'm happy to return with David Berger from Stewardship Partners, as well as former Commissioner Bryant, to present on the Salmon Safe certification that was awarded recently to, actually earlier this month, the Sea-Tac Airport. And as David will talk about further, Salmon Safe is an independent, nonprofit organization that develops standards and certifies organizations with a focus on reducing ecological footprint in some key areas, and those include stormwater management, water quality protection, construction practices, landscape management, habitat restoration, and as importantly, low-impact development design. We first engaged with Salmon Safe regarding possible airport certification about a year ago when David and former Commissioner Bryant met here at Sea-Tac. However, significant work to get to this point has been going on for at least the last 10 years. And to a great extent, it began with the last airport's last major capital development phase. At that time, the port was challenged with not only mitigating impacts related to third runway and other projects, but to provide tangible benefits to water quality and local habitat supporting salmon and aquatic organisms. I believe this certification is a validation that we were able to meet that challenge. And clearly, I want to thank the Commission for their consistent support, as well as the Executive Office, airport directors, and I believe most importantly, the airport engineers and also our maintenance, operations and maintenance staff who day-to-day maintain the structures that we build and keep our airport clean, which is essential for us to meet this certification. But this certification is much about what we have done as it is about what we are going to do in the future. So as we continue to move forward on the Sustainable Master Plan, we're once again challenged with going beyond regulatory compliance, and the Salmon Safe certification provides an excellent roadmap for us to follow. Key areas of Salmon Safe standards that we will be following, and I'm sure you're going to be hearing about this in years to come. They include increasing our use of low-impact development techniques aimed at treating and infiltrating water as opposed to just direct discharging it to the streams. Continue to use innovative means to conserve water, similar to what we're doing on the North Satellite Project, where we're capturing rainwater and utilizing that in our restrooms. And also continued protection and enhancement of habitat and stream corridors that surround the airport. I think we've made a great start on this project, and the certifications are consistent with the Century Agenda as well as our long-range planning objectives. So unless you have any questions, I'd be glad to answer those. Otherwise, I'd like to turn it over to David and then former Commissioner Bryant. And then we'll follow with a presentation of a plaque that Salmon Safe was prepared for us. David?
Thank you, Bob, and thank you, Commissioners, for letting me come and present. A proud moment for the airport, for Port of Seattle, and for the Northwest and surrounding community. This is a great opportunity to present to the Port of Seattle the official Salmon Safe certification of Sea-Tac Airport, the first in the nation. Congratulations. Let me tell you a little bit about Stewardship Partners, because you've heard a little bit about Salmon Safe. Stewardship Partners creates solutions for Puget Sound that engage all kinds of people to become caretakers of the land and water that surround and sustain us. We do this through three primary programs. One is our Snoqualmie Stewardship Program, working with farmers in the Snoqualmie. 12,000 Rain Garden campaign to build rain gardens across Puget Sound to soak up that polluted runoff. And then Salmon Safe. And we've been the leading, the expansion of the Salmon Safe program in Puget Sound, Washington State for the last 12 years. Salmon Safe is an eco-label that started with certifying farms and vineyards, and now golf courses, urban properties, and yesterday, the first airport in the United States. It really is based on environmental practices and commitment to the health of watersheds. And there's 3 watersheds that flow off of the airport. Salmon Safe is a regional certification program from California up to Canada. And so there's place-based organizations that run that. Stewardship Partners runs it in Washington State. There's some local high-profile properties that are certified, including the Department of Ecology, building in Lacey, that makes sense, REI, Nike Corporate Campus in Portland, UW Main Campus, Vulcan Development Projects in the nearby South Lake Union area. Salmon Safe is a rigorous environmental certification process that ensures that a site is having a net positive impact in its watershed. That means that stormwater is managed on-site, and the water leaving the site is as clean as the water that falls on it. Salmon Safe certification also means that a site development and operation over time are protective of water quality with a long-term commitment to restore ecologically sensitive habitats. So across all its operations, the Port of Seattle is an environmental leader both locally and internationally that minimizes its environmental impacts. And this has been demonstrated in several ways, including the Port of Seattle parks being certified salmon safe in 2008, and now the first airport in the United States of America. For Sea-Tac, salmon safe designation is the result of a year-long comprehensive third-party evaluation of the airport's land and water management practices. And certification included Sea-Tac adopting practices that go above and beyond regulatory requirements and committing to further reducing environmental impacts over time, even as passenger numbers increase. We look forward to working collaboratively with the port to implement the requirements of Salmon Safe over the next coming years. And we're also thrilled about the opportunity to showcase the Salmon Safe certification to the millions of people who travel through the airport and how they can take actions to protect our land and water and our icon, the salmon. I want to also thank former Commissioner Bill Bryant for helping to set up the initial meeting with the staff from the airport, and it's been a pleasure working with the staff. So again, thank you all, and congratulations.
Thank you, David. Could you talk a little bit about, we have Salmon Safe certification on other, I believe, seaport properties. Could you talk a little bit about that and possibly other opportunities that we
Sure, absolutely.
work with you?
I think, we started in the farms and vineyards and golf courses and now worked with you on the parks system and now the airport. I think, we were talking, I was with Commissioner Gregoire yesterday for the media event. We were talking about the other properties that you have that we think we should, this is a great third-party evaluation tool. It's a great assessment tool with experts in the field of stormwater management, integrated pest management. So I think there's opportunities to look at Fisherman's Terminal, to look at your other properties that you have, and consider having all Port of Seattle properties Salmon Safe certified in the future.
Yeah. And I should note, while I think this is a value shared by the entire commission and by staff, Commissioner Gregoire has been a strong champion of moving us forward, so thank you for that. Commissioner Bryant?
Well, thank you.
Oh, yeah.
It's a new experience being on this side of the red light.
You started that, right? You started that.
No, I'll keep it short. No, I'm just thrilled to be a part of this. As was mentioned, we began working with Salmon Safe certification in 2008, right after I was elected. And in 2008, on behalf of the Port Commission, I received a plaque almost identical to what we'll be receiving today, on behalf of the fact that we are representing the fact that we had managed all of our 60 acres of park properties consistent with Salmon Safe and salmon habitat requirements. It was over a year ago that David came to me and said, well, you've done this for your parks, but what about doing it at the airport? And we didn't quite know how we would do it at an airport because it had never been done before. But it was an idea that I thought was worth pursuing because of the amount of property we have here and how close we are to Puget Sound. We could be setting an example of how a large industrial-based property that has a lot of chemicals and toxics could be managed in such a way that would be consistent with salmon habitat and the recovery of Puget Sound. And I'm thrilled today to be a part of the fact that we have accomplished that. I was there, as you said, at the first meeting, but many people here in this room and on the commission have kept it alive in my absence, and I'm thrilled to see this day come finally to fruition. So thank you very much. I mean, a lot of people probably do not associate airports and salmon, but I think this day represents the fact that we all have a unique responsibility to play if we're going to save Puget Sound and recover salmon runs. So thank you for letting me be a part of it.
All right. Well, thank you, Commissioner Bryant. Commissioner Felon?
Well, I would just like to acknowledge leadership of Elizabeth Levitt and others at the airport who, all the desires we want to see get things done, it ultimately has to get done on the ground. And that was a huge undertaking. And I'm very happy that she's now charged with our overall environmental work at the port. And just want to say thanks to allowing such an ambitious thing to be accomplished.
Commissioner Gregoire.
Sure, I'll be very brief. I think it was well said, but worth reiterating, because David and I had the opportunity yesterday to visit one of our holding ponds that is a critical part of this infrastructure that enables us to take care of this. When I posted that on Facebook, I got some nice questions back, which is, sure sounds good to me, but what does it mean? And I think that's the right question. But you got to just think about the significant impermeable property that we have here at Airport, and what that means to our runoff and the impact it would have on our salmon. And so we are highly invested with the community about cleaning up Puget Sound, but if you don't think about the ongoing pollution that you'll be in a never-ending cycle. And so David gets all credit for this, but what we're really trying to do is make sure that the water that ends up in those spawning areas is as clean as the water that falls from the sky before it hits our tarmac. And so huge thanks to the team who gets this done every day.
All right, and Don, understand we have a commission photo photo opportunity?
Please. If I can corral all of you right here in this little area,
Much smaller today.
Yeah. I don't know, I haven't been invited up there.
All right. Well, thank you, David, Commissioner Bryant. Okay, because our next two items are rather lengthy, I felt we should go ahead and do the consent calendar as well as public testimony before we move on to the Freight Master Plan briefing and our Commission SAMP Roundtable. So on the unanimous consent calendar, we have items 4A through 4H, and the consent calendar will be considered as one motion unless there's anyone, commissioners or public, that requests an item be taken off the consent calendar. I know of no such request now, but commissioners?
Commissioner Creighton, I believe staff would like to request removal of 4A.
4A?
We'll just lay that on the table today.
Okay. Hearing no other requests, do I have a motion to go forward with items 4B through 4H?
So I made a commitment that I would never pull something just to highlight it, but it's worth highlighting on the day that we get the Salmon Safe certification. 4E's commitment to wetland mitigation. We continue to make improvements here. So I'm not pulling it for that purpose. I'll move 4B through 4H.
All right, so we have a motion and a second on the unanimous consent calendar 4B through 4H. All in favor, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
All opposed? Hearing none, the motion passes unanimously. Thank you.
Mr. President, can I just make a request on the order of things as well? Might we move 6A up before this lengthy conversation, because we have folks here to testify on this? And
Sure, I think that would be worthwhile. So why don't we do that? But before that, why don't we go to public testimony? And first, I have Matthew Landers on item 6A. Mr. Landers, welcome. And if you could, please state your name and organization for the record.
Of course. Thank you for having me here today. My name is Matthew Landers. I'm the Public Policy Manager for the Greater Seattle Business Association, GSBA, our region's LGBT Chamber of Commerce. For 10 years, Washington's civil rights laws have ensured fair and equal treatment of transgender Washingtonians when it comes to hiring and employment. Initiative 1515 would repeal those protections, leaving transgender employees, patrons, and community members vulnerable to discrimination and tarnishing our state's reputation as a welcoming place to work, to live, start a business, go to school, and to raise a family. Initiative 1515 would put this reputation in jeopardy. That's why over 200 companies, large and small, have already joined Washington Won't Discriminate. Businesses like Amazon, Alaska Airlines, Microsoft, Vulcan, Google, and Visit Seattle have proudly signed on to the coalition alongside many small family-owned and locally run mom-and-pop shops. All of these companies agree when Washington laws protect all hardworking employees and patrons, that's when businesses thrive. And in fact, enacting Initiative 1515 would have statewide consequences that would touch every sector of our state's vibrant and growing economy. $4.5 billion a year in federal funding is at risk because 1515 would put Washington state out of compliance with federal regulatory guidelines, including non-discrimination protections for transgender people. These public dollars are necessary to ensure our state's economy remains a hub for innovation in agriculture, aerospace, technology, and manufacturing. I-1515 could drive away billions in economic development from businesses, tourism, and conventions as well. North Carolina saw concerts and business expansions canceled after passing a similar anti-transgender law this spring. According to another study, North Carolina stands to lose about $500 million in economic stimulus because of that law. The economic stakes are just too high to let I-1515 on the ballot. That is why I am asking the Port Commission to support the motion to join Washington Won't Discriminate and oppose Initiative 1515. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Landers. Next, we have testimony on airport transportation. First up is Salah Mohammed. Mr. Mohammed. Then after Mr. Mohammed, we have Chris Van Dyke.
Hello, Commissioners. Thank you for giving me the chance to say something. I'm here, I don't want to take a lot of time from you guys. I just want to say to you guys, thank you on behalf of the 550 taxi drivers who works at the airport. We really want to say thank you for taking impact on our drivers into account for the first time. The new change of RFB is going to help the drivers and the owners at the airport. Last time I said you guys haven't said thank you to us for the past 5 years for doing a great job at the airport. I'm here today to say to you guys, thank you for this change. I appreciate it.
Thank you. Mr. Van Dyke.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. I'm Chris Van Dyke. I work in the ground transportation industry, and frankly, I just wanted to echo Salah's comment, Salah Mohammed's comment. As you all know, Addendum 5 was issued, and the most important thing for everybody is a little bit of certainty. And if the calendar can be held to, that's what's really important to all of us. There's language in it that addresses income, addresses how much. 6 years ago, Yellow, I was part of the deal. We charged $15,000 up to join the airport fleet. Addendum 5 says, hey, put it in writing, what's going to happen here, and everybody can see, and that's great. It's not part of the scoring, but just having it in writing, I can tell you, I have a lot of phone calls from operators that this is a good thing, this is a reassurance. Addendum 5, I think, addressed concerns, lingering concerns, that bearing in mind that the process started well over a year ago, and we're all just looking forward to a decision. So thank you very, very much. It's much more complicated than anybody would like to dream about, so thank you.
All right. Well, thank you. That concludes our public testimony, unless there's anyone who is yet to sign up who would like to speak. Amy? All right. Well, seeing none, why don't we then go to item 6A and Commissioner Fellman? Pass the mic to you, so to speak.
Sir, I would like to ask that we have a motion to start the discussion on our text for the commission to support Washington Won't Discriminate campaign, in which we would join the various other organizations we know have formally opposed this effort. And we've submitted a resolution to, or a motion to the public record that we've modified, and I would like to read the modified version, and if we could put that forward to the motion, or unless you feel that we have to pass the one as stated.
No, please.
Okay, so this is just the three initial bullets that we modified as a group and might still tweak, and the rest of it stays the same. So the Port of Seattle seeks to create jobs and conduct business with the highest ethical standards to honor the community and embrace the richness of diverse workplace. Port of Seattle created the Office of Social Responsibility, which is a catalyst for equity and social change throughout the port and the community. The tragedy in Orlando underscores the importance for us to publicly reaffirm these longstanding commitments and to support our transgender friends, family, coworkers, and neighbors. So if I could seek a motion to support this, unless...
Could I make it just a friendly amendment? Further down in the motion, I think it's just valuable calling out, we've got some citations from the Williams Institute. I just took the time to look that up. That's the Williams Institute at UCLA Law School. It just would help to clarify that for the benefit of, I'll use the word clarity again.
All right, so Commissioner Phelan has moved that forward. Would anyone like to second?
I'd be happy to second.
All right, thank you, Commissioner Bowman. And I'll open the floor up to commissioners to, if anyone wishes to speak to it. If not,
I just wanted to point out that we were moving forward on this motion prior to the tragedy in Orlando, and it didn't get on the agenda fast enough, but this is reiterating our longstanding concerns. The horrific nature of that incident only led us to want to highlight our stated historic position. And so hopefully we all can move on in a more positive light.
all right, well, if I could just say a few words. I want to thank Commissioner Feldman for bringing this forward. I think in view of the horrific events that happened in Orlando, I agree it's even more appropriate that the commission speak out on this issue. And with this year's campaign season being peppered with bigoted and racist sentiments on various issues, I think it's even more important that public agencies take a stand on issues like this. But I think it's really, it goes to the core of the Port of Seattle's mission in that, we're a dual port authority. We have both an industrial port and a tourism-oriented port, and a growing part of our operations, and even more so in the future, will be a bigger part of our operations are our tourism-related assets, including our airport and our cruise terminals, our marinas and whatnot. So I'm very happy to support this motion.
I just want to echo the thoughts here. To me, this is just highly consistent with my personal values, but the values we've articulated for the Port of Seattle. This is an initiative that is currently gathering signatures that would seriously overturn 10 years of anti-discrimination laws on the books. And that, at the core, is what we're talking about here, retaining existing anti-discrimination laws that have long served the state of Washington quite well. Commissioner Creighton, I think you said it well, but it's interesting to note, as we think of ourselves as an economic engine that supports tremendous growth opportunities throughout our region, we not just only support an airport and cruise terminals, but core part of our business is convention business at Bell Harbor and the World Trade Center, and it's just striking to see, and I'm actually somewhat appreciative of the fact the business impacts come to those who decide that they'll take a vote that they're going to discriminate. So let's make sure Washington State retains our laws and that we continue to have the business benefits that come with that.
I just want to take a moment, thank you, to thank Matt Lander. Thank you for your testimony and thank you for your work on this issue. And if there's anything else we can do, a resolution I know is great to add our name to the list, but if there's anything more that we can do to help, please let us know. Thank you.
Commissioner Albrecht?
Well, I guess I want to add my thanks, Matt, and to, frankly, everyone who's working against the initiative. I appreciate the spirit of this. I also oppose the initiative and have signed on as opposed as an individual elected. That said, unfortunately, I'm in the awkward position of needing to abstain from our motion today, and I appreciate where this is coming from, but I feel like I need to explain why that is. And of course, the first thing would be, this is the first conversation we've had publicly about the action that we're about to take. And I personally haven't had any private conversations about this outside of a phone call with one member of our staff, and not about the motion before us, but about the initiative and would I sign on against that, which I of course agreed to. And so I feel like taking a governmental action requires, I think, a reasonable due process where I think the cases are being made, and I would tend to agree with them, that there is a nexus between initiatives like 1515 and our economic interests, and they're opposed. And also our value statement, I agree with that. But I think taking governmental action requires a little bit more sober, methodical approach than what we're taking today. And then finally, I think, too, that one of the things that's kind of lost in our community today, I think, in a larger sense, is government playing in its lane, and taking charge of its responsibilities. I think we've all seen cases where governments have responsibilities for transportation planning, and they're not stepping up and doing that, and they're being distracted doing other things. And I'm not going to call this a distraction, but I think one of the things that we need to do at the port is really focus on the things that we're about. And so while I support the spirit of this and I oppose the initiative, I'm going to take the hard action, regrettable action of abstaining, and I just hope that that's understood, the personal philosophical reasons why I'm doing that.
Well, thank you. So we have a motion and a second before us. All in favor, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Abstain?
Aye, abstain.
Well, thank you. The motion passes.
Thank you, President Creighton. We're now going to move to our new business items 3C and 3D. Item 3C is our Sustainable Airport Master Plan Roundtable Forum on Environmental Sustainability and Growth. Our moderator today will be Elizabeth Levitt.
Well, just to kick it off, I want to welcome all our participants today. And as you may know, in going through our Sustainable Aviation Master Plan and looking at how, basically whether we can, and if so, how we can handle the growth trajectory that shows that we might be handling 65 million passengers every year by 2035. And staff has been really doing a great job in the planning process. We felt it was important as a public agency to up-level the discussion early at the commission, at the political level. And so we've had a number of roundtables, excuse me, focus on the community, the general community around the airport, the business community, our tenants, the airlines, and now we're really happy today to really drill down on environmental issues as they relate to airport growth. So thank you for being here. We look forward to your comments. And with that, I'll hand it over to Elizabeth.
Thank you, Commissioner Creighton. So this is the fourth in a series of roundtables you asked us to organize around topics related to the Sustainable Airport Master Plan, or SAMP. So the focus today, as you said, is really on environmental sustainability, and that's really critical because it's sustainability in the face of some pretty significant growth that we have been facing and will continue to face into the future. So we have with us today a series of speakers to talk about the work we have underway, the work they have underway. Time allowing, I'll also speak briefly about some of the forward-looking work that we'll be doing here at the airport. And we've got leaders from folks that are engaged in FAA research, Alaska Airlines, community members. So we've convened a roundtable that we really think represents a broad range of stakeholder interests. So we have a full program, so I'd like to go ahead and get started and introduce our esteemed panel. So first I'd like to welcome Dr. Ralph Cavallari, who is both Project Director for the Northwest Advanced Renewable Alliance, or NARA, and also the Director at Washington State University for ASCENT, the Aviation Sustainability Center, which is a cooperative aviation research organization co-led by WSU and Massachusetts Institute of Technology, and also one of FAA's primary centers of expertise on environment. Joining Ralph is Carol Sim, who is the Director of Environmental Affairs for Alaska Airlines and a key business partner of ours. Carol has been at Alaska for over 10 years. We have Council Member Kathy Hogarty from the Tukwila City Council, and Kathy also co-chairs the Highline Forum and the Soundside Alliance. Former Burien Mayor and City Council member and a longtime community member following Sea-Tac Airport way back to the third runway days and before, Rose Clark. And then also Vice Chair of the Beacon Hill Community Council, Maria Batayola, who is also currently focused on airport impacts and the cumulative impacts of the airport and other transportation initiatives in her community. And Vlad Gutman, who's the Washington Director for Climate Solutions and also a member of the Commission's new Energy and Sustainability Policy Committee that first met last month. So I'm going to begin with Dr. Cavallari, and he's going to talk a little bit about the work that he's been doing in both the Ascent and NARA programs, and then we'll turn it over to Carol from there. Dr. Cavallari, thank you, Ralph.
Thank you, Elizabeth. And Commissioners, thank you for this opportunity to share with you some of the exciting things that are going on in the FAA-sponsored Center of Excellence known as Ascent. Formerly, it's the Center of Excellence for Alternative Jet Fuels and Environment. And I'll conclude with a few brief comments about the USDA project that we lead at Washington State University, known as NARA, which stands for Northwest Advanced Renewables Alliance, and where we turn forests / piles into jet fuel and other things. So I don't. Can you see the slides from where you are?
Yes,
oh,
we have.
All right, very good. Wasn't sure.
So we are paying attention when we look down, FYI.
All right, very good.
Exactly.
So I need to put up the disclaimer that the FAA requires that any opinions, findings, conclusions, or recommendations are mine, not the FAA's. I'm not an employee of the FAA. But I do want to recognize the financial support and program leadership from the FAA Office of Environment and Energy. Okay, oh, the wheel. There we go, the other way. So within the FAA, many of the various divisions or offices, as they call them, have an activity known as a Center of Excellence. A Center of Excellence is a group of universities that are chosen in a competitive fashion to provide scientific information, research, and so forth to the FAA for their purposes. So the Center of Excellence for Alternative Jet Fuel and Environment is the one for the Office of Environment and Energy at the FAA. On the screen, you'll see the 10 focus areas that we deal with. On the column labeled Alternative Jet Fuels, you'll see we deal with everything from the jet fuel feedstock development all the way through fuel performance testing and so forth. On the right-hand side of that list, things we do in other areas of the environment. And I should note that Ascent is actually a follow-on to a previous Center of Excellence which went by the name of Partner, and which was put together initially to deal with noise and other environmental impacts. So we continue that work. Very briefly, there's the 16 universities on that slide. And but very importantly, I want to note the advisory committee of 58 organizations, which includes 5 airports, one of which is Sea-Tac, 4 airlines, one of which is Alaska, various NGO and advocacy groups dealing with noise and other matters, aviation manufacturers, feedstock fuel manufacturers, various R&D and service organizations. We meet with that group twice a year and have regular email conversations with them.
And you should point out Washington State University as well. I'm sorry, didn't on that slide.
Oh, Yeah,
This is a cougar-safe environment, actually.
Yes, yes. All right.
Very much.
So I'm from Washington State University. I'm the director of the center. The co-director is John Hansmet at Massachusetts Institute of Technology. Our sister university and the State University of Washington is a member of this, as is
Sorry, I wanted to
Oregon
give you some
State.
play.
But anyway, it's not a football Saturday, so we get along well on this. So you're going to see a series of slides which are actually taken from this brochure, and the FAA sent copies of this for all of you, and Elizabeth has those and we'll pass them out. So you'll be able to read it. It's very dense, unfortunately, but I have no claim to authorship on it. So let's start off by just reviewing for everyone, in case you weren't already aware of it, and I'm sure most of you are, that aviation has huge economic and societal benefits. It's 5.4% of our gross domestic product, 11.8 million U.S. jobs, $1.5 trillion annually in economic impact on our country, 27% of our exports and 22% of our imports. It's important. The Office of Environment and Energy at the FAA has 4 goals, and they're listed on this slide. Reading from left to right: noise, reduce the number of people exposed to significant noise around our airports; air quality, reduce significant air quality impacts attributable to aviation; climate, achieve carbon neutral growth by 2020, and that's relative to a 2005 baseline; and energy, develop and deploy sustainable alternative aviation fuels. In order to achieve those goals, the FAA has this office at the FAA has developed what they call the 5-pillar approach. Starting at the top left, science and tools, doing the research that underpins actions and mitigations that they might undertake. This is largely the work of the Ascent Center that I represent. The second pillar is the development of new technology, and there is a program within this Office of Environment and Energy that deals, it's known as CLEAN, and that works with the manufacturers and so on to develop new technologies. Third pillar is the development of alternative fuels and helping to get them certified. And that is a 3-prong approach with Ascent and a CLEAN, but also an organization known as the Commercial Aviation Alternative Fuels Initiative, CAFE. And they do a lot of work in putting people together to help things get done, and they're a resource for answers about certification and what have you. The fourth pillar is improvements of operations, air traffic management modernization, next gen, which I'm sure you're familiar with, and policy, whether that's U.S. policy or international policy. So turning quickly to some of the topics. Noise, the goal is to reduce exposure to noise around airports. And I think the chart on the left, it's rather difficult to see, but if you look at the blue dots, you'll see the steady downward trend in noise around the airports, dating back to, I believe it's 1980 on there to the present. On the right, you'll see that the documentation that there's been a 95% reduction in the number of people exposed to significant noise in proximity to airports, all the while having a 260% increase in passengers traveling.
Can I just
Significant
interrupt 1
accomplishment.
second?
Commissioner Feldman.
Do you know how representative that is of Sea-Tac?
I do not. I'll make a disclaimer here. Alt fuels is my expertise. There's other folks within Ascent that are much better qualified to talk about noise. There's a website known as Noise Quest, and the Ascent website has details of all of the various projects. And so I can certainly get an answer for you to that question, though.
And if I could ask, so I've always understood and I'm a business lawyer, I'm not a scientist, I'm not an engineer, so bear with me. But I understand that there's sort of an inverse relationship. If you talk to the communities, their big issues are noise and emissions. And when, messing around with aircraft engines to reduce noise or reduce emissions, I understand there's a sort of an inverse relationship that if you burn cleaner in an engine, it increases the noise, and if you try to silence the engine, there's more emissions, but it looks like the historical trend is downward on both issues.
Yeah, as I said, that's not my expertise. Looks like Carol has an answer.
Is that on? I think that one of the key points is up on the slide at the very bottom on the right, where it says it needs to be developed a balanced approach using source reduction, land use planning, operational procedures, and noise restrictions, is because there is that inverse relationship. So the more you do to reduce emissions, you do increase the engine noise. So we want to look at that all in one measure so that we're not improving emissions tremendously, creating more noise, or mitigating the noise, but you're increasing emissions. So really taking that balanced approach.
Thank you.
Thanks, Carol. So what is the FAA Center doing right now? In the top box, this is research that's being done by the Ascent scientists. They're looking at things such as annoyance to understand community reaction to aircraft noise, the effect of noise on children's learning, the effect of noise on human health, the field studies to determine the physiological impacts on sleep disturbance, and modeling to improve our understanding and prediction of the effect of noise. That's the more fundamental research. Mitigation steps are listed below, and they include new technology, changes in operations, sound insulation near the airports, land use planning, and of course policy. That's that balanced approach that Carol was mentioning. And boy, that's sensitive. Sorry about that. Okay, moving quickly since I don't have a lot of time. Another important aspect of what we do in Ascent is air quality, reducing significant air quality impacts attributable to aviation. And I think this slide says a lot. If you take a look at the DC-8 from 1958 taking off, and you look at the Boeing 787 in 2012, the difference is striking. No words are needed to describe that.
Hey, Ralph, can I get you to elaborate on the 18% reduction in fuel burn? Is that in absolute and total terms, even with the growth in passenger volumes and?
I believe that's correct. It is. The efficiencies are that much better. Yes.
Right, and so really stunning.
It is. And then there's characterization that's been done of the various gases and particulate matter, and a lot of that's been done in conjunction with NASA. And then, of course, they've also been able to document a 50% reduction in particulate matter when alternative jet fuels are used. So what are we currently doing? You'll see in the various science and integrated modeling steps up there, again, looking at the effect of emissions on health, working on engine certification, emission measurements, and modeling of all of these things in a national sense, in a local sense. Mitigation, again, new technologies, improved operations, alternative fuels, and policy. Wherever you see the little A with the wings on it, that's things that Ascent is doing. Boy, that is sensitive. I apologize.
Do you mind, sorry, staying one slide back? That top Ascent, I understood you were in the, help me, are you in all the science and integrated modeling? Is that what you mean by that? And,
yes.
And between operations and alternative fuels, that's what
yes, that's correct. When it's on that's for the whole box. That means that every element in that box, one or more of the universities in Ascent is involved in that.
So just not new technology.
Right. That's because the CLEAN program does that.
Got it. Okay.
Which is a separate budget line.
Yep.
Much better. Thank you, Elizabeth. So what are we doing now? Of course, the CLEAN program has been working with manufacturers, and they're showing an example there of a Boeing aircraft that has the composite exhaust nozzle and also the adaptive trailing edge, both of which are impactful. And then down below you see the relationship with NASA. You'll see the the NASA, I believe it's a DC-8 flying there with, it's emitting, and the trailing plane is taking the measurements. It's really a challenging thing, expensive, and we're very glad that NASA's working with us on it. I wanted to put all of this in context for you. This chart, many people have shown it. The vertical axis is millions of tons of fossil-based carbon dioxide emitted. Okay, and if you look at the dotted line or the dashed line that's at the top, that is the projection of various models of the amount of emission if no actions were taken as aviation globally increases. Now, the first green bar down from that shows the beneficial effect of improved technologies. These would be airframe and engine technologies. The lighter green bar below that shows the effect of improved operations, such as you might get from NextGen and certain activities on the ground. The third bar down, infrastructure, are things that I'm certain you're familiar with, not running the APU at the gate and so forth. All of those are good things. Also, the ground support equipment being electrified rather than running on fossil fuel. So the important thing to look at, though, for the theme of this discussion is this critical role of alternative jet fuels in getting to the goal of reducing by 50% the fossil carbon emissions by 2050. None of those things previously in green will get us there. The alternative jet fuels will make the difference. And we have to get that into our system soon to start making those advances.
And what, excuse me, Commissioner Albert, in terms of use of alternative jet fuels, does that mean replacing 100%, replacing 50%, replacing 20% in terms of the fuel currently being used?
Well, at present, none of the alternative fuels are certified at 100%. 50% is the highest percentage, so they are blended.
But for purposes of this chart?
Well, what it represents with that increasing triangular shape there is that there's an increasing use of alternative jet fuels, displacing percentages of fossil fuel.
Okay, so this is a projection of
yes.
future use. Okay.
Yes, it is.
So, Ralph, I was going to ask about a slide which is in the handout, but it does not appear that, I think you've gone past it in the presentation, and it recaps BTU per passenger mile for various travel mode types, aircraft, cars, transit buses, and rail. And I'm not sure if you have that available to put up.
I do. I did skip that. I'm sorry. There it is.
There it is. Okay, so I just wanted to clarify. So what this is showing is each of those lines represents a mode type, right? So that top line on the far left in 1980s aircraft, and you can see that the BTU per passenger mile has gone from, what, 5,500 to just 2,800, something like that?
That's right.
Estimating
That's right.
that. And I guess the reason why I'm pointing us to this is it points out that effective policy to reduce carbon emissions sometimes gets you to some counterintuitive places, because if you look at, in today's environment, the top polluter, carbon emitter per passenger mile is transit buses. And so it is the challenge, I think, for public agencies like ours to really truth out where the good work is, and I think I'm bringing this up because we have some panel members who can perhaps speak to this, so that we actually, as we go off and create policy, we're not just feeling good, but we're actually accomplishing the thing that we set out to accomplish. And sometimes that's a bigger lift than others, because the science doesn't always line up neatly to the politics.
Can I just, one more thing? I hope that some of our future presenters are going to focus on Sea-Tac, because, I mean, in the transit department in Washington, or at least in Seattle, we have hybrid buses, we have electrification, we have, this national model may not be as representative of some of the more progressive things that we do. So I'm hoping that these are good trends to know, and to see how Sea-Tac fits into this I would expect us to be somewhat of a leader in the trend.
So to conclude the section about the FAA Center of Excellence, this is a listing of the current projects that we're dealing with relative to alternative jet fuel. Actually, if you go to ascent.aero, you can see all the projects, including noise and emissions and so forth, and click on them and find all the details you need, who's doing it, where it's being done, who the project leader is at the FAA, and who the researchers are, and get more contact information there. Changing hats very quickly, the Northwest Advanced Renewables Alliance is a way of taking forest slash piles, which we have lots of in the Northwest, and turning it into jet fuels and other products. My colleague Mike Wolcott and I direct this project out of Washington State University. We have 180 people involved. They're all over the country, and there's the list. And I'm not going to take any time to go through all of that, but other than to note that the University of Washington is also a partner in this one. And I wanted to just underscore that some of the things we've looked at are the economic impact of making alternative jet fuels from our forests in the Northwest. This is a detailed study of the region of western Montana, northern Idaho, and northeastern Washington. And this is the economic impact of one production facility. 110 million per year, 736 jobs, and a 60% reduction in global warming potential based on the fuel that would come out of there. The numbers are even larger when you start looking at the other areas that we've examined. Our current process for taking the forest slash piles and turning into jet fuel and other products is, as you might expect, since it's a university project, we're at the preliminary process design, or with some detailed process design coming from our corporate partners such as GEVO. What we've learned is that we need some optimization in the value chain. And what that's all about is if you had a barrel of oil and you put it in a refinery, one of the lowest value things you would make is fuel, but you'd make a lot of it. Think about what it costs to go buy a quart of lubricating oil relative to a gallon of fuel, or going farther, plastics and so forth that are made. So when you have a biorefinery where you're taking biomass and making jet fuel, we need to improve the value chain by having additional products, and we're working hard on that. We're looking at the supply chain in our Northwest. Yes?
Do you mind staying there? I just think of that as probably the most critical step to deployment. So help me when you say we're working hard on that. How do you approach that?
Sure. We have a whole team that's looking at co-products, everything from lignosulfonate to plastics to epoxies to just a whole range of things. We're even looking at using this as a source for nanocarbon for composites. There's an almost endless array of things that could be made. The question is what can be made economically, and putting those pieces together. Fortunately, the Northwest is full of great people to work with to help make that happen. We've looked at three chains. That one slide I showed you was what's known as the Western Montana Corridor. There's one called Mid-Cascades to the Pacific, and this would be primarily central. How do I want to say this? It's the Pacific coast west of the Cascades, from central Washington to central Oregon, north to south. Very dense forests in there. One of the things we found was that the pulp industry, paper industry in the region, has almost disappeared. And those pulp mills could be turned into biorefineries if we can capture them before they're dismantled for scrap. It's a very similar process.
Time is of the essence.
Absolutely.
So what about the effluent? Are they similar too?
The effluent, you mean as emissions and so on? No, it would be different than that. We would try, in order to make it economically work, there should be nothing known as waste. Everything should be used.
Like the sound of that.
So some take-home lessons from this project, and I didn't mention it's a 5-year, $40 million project that's in its final year. The obvious, making alternative jet fuels is complicated. It's even more complicated to make money at it. But it is great for the environment. It's good for the local economies, and we need to continue on the pathway to commercial reality by focusing on the supply chains. We will be, it's been announced that we will be working with our partners at Alaska to demonstrate that you can fly an airplane, and I'm pleased to say that our fuel, which is produced through a company... I didn't say that well, did I, Carol? In order for an alternative jet fuel to be used in an aircraft, in a commercial setting, it has to be certified. No surprise there. We all want certified fuel. So there's a very elaborate process to get a new pathway certified. So our partner Gevo, who has developed the conversion technology that we're using, has just completed and received approval for their pathway to make jet fuel. And so it's known as ASTM D7566. Please remember that. But when you blend it, and this fuel can be blended up to 30% with regular fossil jet, it becomes ASTM D11655, which is what you have in your hydrants right now. The point is, with certification, it just goes into your hydrant after it's blended, with a few details there. But Carol will...
Can I ask a question on the, this is on the money side of this, and I completely agree. The complicated part is making this all pencil in a way. And what's the delta we have to overcome in the current condition? I realize it's somewhat theoretical still, but how much distance do we need to cover?
Yeah, that's a great question. There are providers out there that claim they can make it for $2 a gallon.
Versus
jet fuel, which is just about in that range, dollar something. I don't know.
See, I'm not buying that every day. I know there's a lot here. But
yeah, and it changes. The spot price changes. But that's, I don't know if I believe those numbers. I'll just say that. Our analysis says that if we don't care about internal rate of return on the money we use for capital, we can make it for something over 3 or 4, somewhere in that range. If you want 20% rate of return internally, you're going to be up there more than that. That's why it's so critical to have the other products, because they'll carry a lot of that burden of the capital.
Thank you.
Yeah, if I could follow up to that as well. That's the actual cost for production of the fuel. That does not include any of the logistics of getting it to the airport and into plane.
Yeah, it's safe to say we have a ways to go before this is sustainable.
Yeah. Yes, indeed. But, one step at a time. Did I interrupt someone? I'm sorry.
I think actually, Commissioner Feldman.
I was of the understanding, at least in diesel automobiles, that the biofuels actually provide some added lubricity that would reduce the need for some potential other products that would cost the airlines.
There is a study that was done by Lufthansa using, I believe, is an Airbus. I don't recall, but for 6 months they flew a plane back and forth between 2 cities in Germany. One engine was fueled by alternative fuels, the other by conventional fuels, and at the end of that test period, they found they had a 1% reduction in fuel consumption, and they had less wear on the fuel pump and other components. That study's on the web if you want to find it, but that's the only one I know of a long-scale, a long-term test.
And the other thing, just in terms of price, I understand that the Congress does not provide the incentives, in terms of getting the initial technology off the burn as much as they do for like solar or electric subsidies.
I think the way I would respond to that is that the federal landscape on this topic changes. And for the private sector to invest, they need some stability.
Could I, so at the, you said your 5-year project is coming to a close.
Yes.
And I heard we got some work to do here to get to
Yes.
deployment. Where do we go from here?
Well, first of all, being at a university, we're looking for follow-on grants to continue the work. We've got a great team, and there's a lot to be done. The size of the grants will be smaller, but they'll be more focused on the topics that need to be done. We're going to continue looking for multiple opportunities from various sources to continue the work. To that end, we had a meeting, what was it, Carol, 6 weeks ago, something like that? May 5th, where we met with people from industry about, okay, how do we, and the airlines and so on, to say, how do we make these next steps? How do we make this a commercial reality? And we're still working on that, but we will continue. I put this slide, it's my last slide, but it's a really important slide. What we heard from all these small alternative jet fuel companies is they have a hard time getting financing. And the thing they need to get financing is a market they can take to the financial people. So what you've done here as commissioners is so commendable in your study of looking at what are the next steps that have to be taken in order to make it possible for Sea-Tac to have alternative jet fuels in its hydrant system. It's very progressive, and I can't underscore how important that is. So thank you for that.
Thank you, Ralph. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Carol Sim, who's going to talk a little bit about the Alaska Airlines experience and the work that they've been doing in this field.
Thank you, commissioners, for having us here today to represent the airline perspective. What I would like to do is I will definitely get to what's going on at Sea-Tac, but talk a little bit about this in context of just domestic and international aviation, since emissions are tied really directly to both. But before I start, I really want to congratulate you on the Salmon Safe Award that you just received as a regulated tenant here at the airport. It's really important to us. We obviously have to work with every other airport that we fly into, and stormwater compliance is a huge challenge. And when we work here at Seattle, it's great because we just know that everything is controlled, and it's just one less thing that is the Director of Environmental Affairs that I have to worry about. So I really want to congratulate you guys, and we appreciate your efforts on that as well. So what I'd like to start with, our discussion so far today has really been focused mostly on the emissions and noise, but talk about a little bit about the other environmental impacts that aviation does have that maybe are a little bit less visible. Ralph did mention the electrification of GSE, or going to low emission vehicles. Here at Sea-Tac, the Commission has supported, with the Clean Cities grants as well, the ability for us to transition a pretty significant portion of our fleet to electric, and we will continue to do that. One of our challenges as an airline is that you are competing with many other airports who want to make that claim as being the greenest airport in the country, and so we're seeing more and more airports sort of vie for those very valuable dollars for conversion of equipment. Definitely, since this is by far our biggest airport, we definitely commit more resources here, but it is something that we continue to support. And again, we applaud you in the partnership that we have had with the Port of Seattle in doing that. And then the other big program that some of the public may not be as aware of is the in-flight recycling waste. I believe last year we recycled 1,700 tons of in-flight material. When you think about, if any of you fly, particularly fly internationally, the number of times that the flight attendants come through the cabin, and every time, a new cup, a new can, I mean, there are just millions and millions of tons of waste that are generated in the sky. So we are very proud of our record of being, particularly with Horizon, the first airline to really start a recycling program.
And Carol, am I right? I thought I heard a couple years ago that Horizon reached 100% recycling of all on board.
We do waste sorts, so we can validate a particular flight. We can't validate every single flight, but Horizon actually was a leader in this. We had people in our food and beverage department that in the 80s thought that recycling was important, and there was not good municipal infrastructure for recycling programs at that time. But because we had very dedicated people, it's in the DNA of Horizon to recycle the in-flight waste. And at Alaska in about 2009, we really set some metrics around that, and it was a difficult effort to get the flight attendants to buy into it. Even though they have to handle the waste, they have to do more sorting inside, and they have to really understand sort of each different airport, because each airport handles recycling differently. For example, in San Francisco and most California airports is that they just commingle everything, and it's separated off-site. So the visibility that the flight attendants have is that everything's just going into the garbage stream. So it's really an education process that their efforts in the cabin are very worthwhile, and it does contribute. And then we also started a program that when our senior leadership flies to thank the flight attendants for their efforts around recycling, so that they know that it is important to the business as a whole. So we are very proud of that. You guys, I can't remember the year that the Port of Seattle set up all of your recycling programs, making that much easier for us to deal with our waste on the ground here as well. And then switching over back to emissions, one of the things that I do want to say that the aviation industry, from our industry perspective, is one of the few industries that is out there that has actually voluntarily undertaken emission reductions. We hear on a very regular basis about industries that are fighting legislation to reduce CO2 emissions and fight climate change. But as an aviation industry, we recognize that our future growth really depends on this, and so there's just a lot of voluntary programs that have been taken. We have at the international level committed to a 1.5% decrease in emissions per annum from 2010 to 2020, carbon neutral growth from 2020, and then a 50% reduction in emissions by 2050 over 2005 baseline. And that's actually that slide that Ralph had that showed the trajectory of growth. That's really what that was getting to, is showing what the declines can be made. So as an environmental professional in this industry, sometimes you hear about the public outcry about aviation, but there have been tremendous emission reductions that have been made voluntarily over the course of the history of aviation. To achieve some of these goals, and Ralph had this that was on that slide talking about technology, operations, infrastructure, and market-based measures. It's what at the international level, at the International Council, just lost my train of thought.
International
Aviation Organization, there we go. That we really look at what we call a basket of measures. We talked about the balanced approach between noise and emissions, is that they really look at a basket of measures, that all of these things have to be employed effectively to reach that 2050 50% emission reduction target. And what we're really working on right now is a global market-based measure for basically capping the growth at 2020. So sometime there's just going to have to be an interim where we're actually paying for the price of carbon, and that is really being discussed at an international level right now. One of the things that we as an industry are concerned about is various countries or states trying to have their own carbon taxes, because airplanes take off at one airport and they land at another airport and they burn across that, and we can't change our emission rate across the course of that flight. So really looking for one global international standard. Although some countries and some airlines don't support that, it's better than just have a single scheme across the globe than to have multiple schemes in various countries.
I have a quick question, John.
Absolutely.
So wasn't there a European Union standard? Not that you have to worry about the union anymore, but
For a period of time.
Yeah, but wasn't there like some tax flying over Europe that was challenged and I think successfully defeated?
It was challenged. It still is in effect for European airlines flying between EU member countries, but the big issue became in the extraterritorial trying to impose taxes on airlines who are flying into the EU and other countries. So if we fueled here, and well, we don't, but if one of your airlines fueled here and went to, say, Heathrow, that they would be taxed across that whole flight, the emissions on that entire flight, not when they just enter EU airspace. So countries that don't normally get together, Russia, India, China, the United States, all really pushed back on that. So they have backed off on that, but if ICAO cannot come to agreement on the cap and trade on the carbon emission growth, then that will snap back in at the end of this year. So European countries are very supportive of the work being done at ICAO as well. News last week, who knows what's going to happen with the EU trading scheme.
So I have a question regarding market forces, because it occurs to me as I think about that, that prior point that was made regarding an 18% overall reduction in fuel consumed, that one of the incentives for that was the very high cost of fuel, and we're in a low-cost fuel environment right now, and so we've come out of a period of time where we had the economics aligned with some of the environmental objectives, and there's a little bit of a breaking down of that in low-cost fuel. So the question really is, Carol, what's the commitment? What do we do in order to maintain the momentum and to continue to make progress in reducing overall carbon emissions in that scenario?
A little bit out of my wheelhouse, but I will address that to the extent that I can. There's two different, I think, questions there. One is what is going on internationally. And because we are looking at a global market-based scheme, well, there will be a cost of carbon internationally, and they're currently looking at how those costs will be allocated across sectors. There's still going to be that cost. It's going to be more than just your fuel cost. You're going to be paying for emissions as well. So there is a driver there. When you get to discussing the cost of aviation biofuels, I think that's where the significant drop in fuel prices is perhaps slowing down development a little bit. Did that answer your question?
It was an unfair question, but yeah, it's a good stab. Thanks.
All right, so I just would like to spend the last few minutes that I have talking specifically about some of the things that Alaska Airlines has done. And I'm in the fortunate position that here at Sea-Tac, the Commission is very well aware of what we've done because you have participated in most of these things. So we do have a goal to reduce our aircraft emissions by 20% for our mainline flying by 2020 compared to a 2009 baseline. That does sort of help with your Century Agenda goal of reducing aircraft-related emissions by 25%. So the way that we're doing that is we try to bucket them into the what we fly, how we fly, and the fuel reuse. So the what we fly is using, well, it's going to change soon if the Virgin acquisition goes through, but we all are a Boeing fleet. We have a very young fleet. I think our average aircraft age is 9.5 years. So all of the technology advancements that Boeing has put forth, we have been able to realize with just the decrease in fuel consumption. We have 13 737 MAX aircraft on order, which are 13% more efficient than even the Boeing next generation 800s and 900 aircraft. So that will help us out significantly. The how we fly, this is using performance-based navigation. As you guys are well acquainted with the Greener Skies Over Seattle project, that really helps us and any RNP equipped carriers flying into Sea-Tac to reduce emissions if they're using the RNP approaches. From some of the analysis that Boeing has done, that's about 88 gallons of fuel per flight. So really significantly reduces emissions. And they're really looking at taking this technology in Greener Skies and being able to use that at 12 additional airports in the country that are similarly configured as Sea-Tac, where you've got parallel runways that are very close together as well. So we look at how we fly. We were the first airline to get FAA approval for APU on demand on our flights to Hawaii, so significantly reduced emissions that way. And then really looking looking at the fuel we use. Here in Seattle, our current level of uptake is about 150 million gallons of fuel per year. Our total is about 550 million gallons per year in air group. So this is why when we look at the wanting to use aviation biofuels, makes sense since our biggest uptake is here to try to bring something into the Seattle airport. We appreciate the efforts of the Commission and the Boeing Company in partnering on the biofuel infrastructure study that will help us understand how we can best bring in a commercial supply, what mode of transit makes sense, where we can actually blend the fuel, as Ralph talked about. The maximum blending percentage is 50% with conventional, depending on the fuel type. Some biofuels that have been approved can only be blended up to 10%. So we will still need that petroleum fuel to be in the mix.
Commissioner?
I just, quick question. Biz, when is that study expected to be completed?
Well, Ms.
Carol?
Sim is going to be leaving here at 3 o'clock to go upstairs to do a kickoff meeting with the contractor, and we're scheduled to be back later on this year to give you the results of the study.
Okay, I hope that part of the work is also going to be some policy recommendations. I know that last year when we approved this study, I think it was in December, I'm looking at Commissioner Creighton, my hope is that we would take some of the early recommendations to the legislature in case there are some funding opportunities that we could present to them. So I hope that as you're talking to the contractor that you're thinking about those policy recommendations as well. But federally, I'm sure obviously you think about that, but particularly on the state side. And ideally, we would have that prior to November, December timeframe so we could give them a heads up.
Yeah, I think some of our friends in the Washington State Department of Commerce would be quite happy to try to partner with us on getting infrastructure installed. So definitely, we'll take that.
Okay, thank you.
And we'll bring that with Elizabeth's staff as well to the meeting today, so we can start from the very beginning with that expectation. So good timing on that.
Could I just inquire, so is the infrastructure we're looking at to include the mixing capabilities?
Yeah, so in
On-site?
essence, since we don't really know where the biofuel will be produced or whether it will be delivered by truck, rail, barge, or some other pipeline method,
Combination thereof.
the idea is that we'll study how we would place the blending facility we know we're going to need, and then what sort of facility would you need via any of those routes to get to Sea-Tac to get that fuel then conveyed to the airport where the blending would likely occur.
So it's envision the airport's the blending station, and then there needs to be segregated holding tanks to deal with the
Nope.
different grades, or you're assuming that
Well, we don't think so, but that's part of what the experts that we've just hired will help us understand.
Right.
So once it's drop-in, it's drop-in. It won't matter if it's going to an Alaska flight or going to a,
it'll just be the
somebody else's
ratio
flight.
of the quantity of the bio versus the traditional.
Yep.
Right. And one of the key issues for the infrastructure study is looking at where should the blending occur, right? And where can that be stored? I mean, ultimately, with biofuels, they are being designed to be drop-in fuels that they can just go into a hydrant system, and that's a really easy thing to say. But when you come down to actually starting to do that is, can you actually put it into the pipeline? Will the pipeline owners allow you to do that? Where does it come from? So there's still a lot of the logistics that have to be ironed out even after the fuel approval and production. So we are definitely with this project a step ahead of really what's going on at most airports. So,
But am I remembering United is doing this down in LAX?
yes, the Alt-Air facility, right now that fuel is being trucked from, so the Alt-Air facility is about 15 miles from the airport, being trucked in and then put into the hydrant system. So it'd be blended offsite. So we would hope to not have to truck in large quantities of fuel.
Yeah, no, that would be great. But it would just be nice to have that as way of background so we can see how we can leapfrog over what's happening in California and really be a leader in this.
Yep, absolutely.
And it's one of the concerns about the pipeline system that this acts as like a solvent, that it has a cleaning effect on. I know that for older diesel engines, when you drop in, depending on the percentage, you get some of that. Certainly, it was the case with the Washington State ferries. I know in my own diesel car that you have to change out the filters initially. Once that throat is cleared, you can then proceed as normal.
Right. So you might want to comment on
Yeah.
this, but we're really looking at not like with the first generation biodiesels that definitely had those issues, looking at renewable second generation fuels, or they have to engineer out all of those issues. But that has been a concern of people.
Yeah.
And Carol, maybe this, you're going to talk about this, but if not, could you talk a little bit about your recent initiative that you've begun with, is it GIVO?
I can, that's my next slide.
Carol, would you like me to make a quick comment? So biodiesel, as is commonly known, is not at all like alternative jet fuel. It's a fatty acid methyl ester. It's completely different. What we're making with alternative jet fuels are molecules that you would typically you would find them in a barrel of crude. So you won't have those kinds of issues.
So as Commissioner Creighton alluded, I will just talk about a little bit about the background of our biofuel efforts, our involvement, and then go to what our announcement earlier this month. Alaska was the first U.S. airline to join the Sustainable Aviation Fuels Users Group, which is primarily European, but airlines all over the globe who have signed pledges to use alternative fuels, but also just to use alternative fuels that are made from sustainable sources, so that we're not getting into the situations where recently Indonesia did a mandate, we're going to use 2% biofuels by X date. Well, to do that, they had to use palm, which was a non-sustainable source. So this really kind of helps the industry look at not just biofuels, but sustainable aviation fuels as well. With that, we partnered with Washington State, with the airport, and many other stakeholders on the Sustainable Aviation Fuels Northwest initiative, which helped us identify what were viable feedstocks in our region and what kind of supplies that we had. Through our efforts on that, the HEFA, or hydrotreated esters and fatty acids, basically used cooking oil and vegetable oils to biofuel, was approved through ASTM. And that was done in July 2011. In November 2011, we did our 75 flights out of here to DC and to Portland on both 737s and on the Bombardier Q400s. And that was the last, until very recently, that was the last fuel type to be approved or certified by ASTM. GIVO received its certification at the beginning of April is when the new ASTM spec was published for that fuel. And we were able to launch 2 flights on June 7th out of here, one to Washington, D.C., and one to San Francisco. I was fortunate enough to be on the San Francisco flight. Commissioner Creighton attended the press conference. We had the CEO of the fuel producer there, as well as the farmer who grew the feedstock for us. And it was great. Joe Sprague, our Senior Vice President of External Affairs, came on and made an in-flight announcement. The passengers applauded both before we left and when we landed in San Francisco. And they actually came up and asked a lot of questions of the fuel producers on the aircraft. So a lot of engagement and interest, positive interest on the part of the public as well. So I think that was a great partnership as well. As Ralph mentioned, with the NARA fuel that they are producing, GIVO is also the fuel producer for that. So instead of using a non-edible sustainable corn as the feedstock, it will use woody biomass and forest residuals for the feedstock. So that is a great coup for Washington State, and I think will move us all farther along the path of integrating this into our aircraft, your pipelines, or your hydrant system as well. I think that I will just leave it there and let you guys ask any follow-up questions if you have them. And again, thank you for your leadership in helping move this forward.
I just wanted to point out, depending on the mode of transportation, that I know in terms of there are various biofuels that when spilled have, well, maybe not toxic effects, like oils damage bird feathers, and things like this, that depending on how fast your rate of evaporation is and stuff like that. So it's the safety with which these things are transported. And I think some law is vague as to whether it is a petroleum product, but obviously if the raw material is not petroleum per se. It's just a question of the definition of that. So I know there was some question with the facility in Grays Harbor, whether or not tug escorts were necessary or other things like that. I just want to make sure that I would not want biofuels to get a bad name by having a spill thereof.
Absolutely.
I think we're in agreement.
So thank you, Carol. So I was going to touch for a couple of minutes on some of the work that we've been doing at the airport, but you are all very well aware of that, and I think in the interest of allowing our community partners to speak, I'm going to turn it over. But I first just wanted to say, you know, all the sustainable work we do, all the sustainability we're integrating into our master plan is all wonderful, but airports still have impacts on local communities, and that's really the reason why we've assembled the rest of the panel that we have today. So with that, I'm really going to turn it over to the rest of the panel so that we can really welcome the representatives of the community interests that really are affected by the airport and understand more about their perspective. So first up is Councilmember Kathy Hogarty, who serves as co-chair on 2 airport forums, Highline Forum and Soundside Alliance. Thanks.
Is this on now? Okay, I've got it on. All right, so I am going to broaden this conversation out quite a bit. We've been talking about fuel specifically, but I understand that the subject is impacts to our community here. And my name is Kathy Hogarty, as stated. I am a council member for the Tukwila City Council. I'm on my 3rd term there. I am the chair of Soundside Alliance, which is an economic development forum, which is the cities of Burien, Normandy Park, Sea-Tac, Tukwila, Des Moines. I have to look at my list so I can rattle it off quickly. Highline College and the Port of Seattle. Thank you, Tom Albro, for being a part of that. And then I also co-chair with Commissioner Creighton, president, the Highline Forum, which is the same cities, and I think Federal Way may have joined or is talking about joining those groups. So I'm talking not only representing Tukwila, but really representing that area, the Highline Ridge. And so the focus is sustainability and environmental sustainability, and I've got lots of notes, but I did want to say one thing that was really interesting is we're talking about transporting these fuels. And just in case you didn't know, the airport fuel line goes, have you ever been to South Center and gone down Strander Boulevard? It's right underneath that. So that is our, our jugular vein coming up here to transport the fuel to the airlines. And I think if there was an event like a big earthquake or something, where that fuel, where's it all going to go? And are we going to be able to fly planes because the fuel lines, if they're leaking and everything? So I'm really glad to hear that's starting to get on the radar, and that you're talking about with this new fuel source, how are you going to transport it safely from one place to the next and get it here, and also get it here in a disaster situation, as more and more of us are getting really aware that disasters do happen, even though they're infrequent. They're very that could be a very big deal, depending on what happens. So environment, noise, and air quality. First of all, because I'm speaking for all of the communities, I want to say that it's very obvious that Sea-Tac is probably the most impacted. And we've got Burien on one side, Tukwila on the other, and then down Des Moines. There's a lot of impacts for these cities. Sea-Tac's seen a lot of the traffic impact. Now, we've talked about air quality as fuel, jet fuel, right? But there's another air quality that we find impact with, especially in Sea-Tac, and that is just a lot of traffic and all the emission that comes from traffic. So how could the airport help or be aware of how to help Sea-Tac in the greater area with those impacts? Well, one of the proposals that I have, having had some input from these communities, is a trust fund. I'm not sure if this is within your legal ability to do, but if you had a trust fund loan system so that cities such as Sea-Tac could build more infrastructure. As we know, we have no public works trust fund for our cities right now because the legislature took that resource away from us. So they've got some issues they've got to think about. People parking, cabs parking on the streets, or people parking on their streets, and different issues like that I think Sea-Tac really needs to, I can't say how they want to mitigate that. But what if the port works with Sea-Tac and the other neighborhoods, giving some sort of financial assistance there? Because definitely the impact is here. And again, like I say, fuel from engines, we don't have the kind of control over that you do here when you're monitoring an airport. Also, east and west connections, such as the Strander Boulevard extension. I talked about Strander Boulevard. That's where the jet fuel line is. But it stops right at the railroad track, and then it takes up on the other side of in Renton. So there's no connection there, so people are forced into like these few main arteries that are going east and west. And then, so then you get traffic congested and you get more air pollution. So those are some of the other things that, again, partnering with us in any way to get those particular east-west connections built. We talked about the alternative fuel. That's what we've been talking about the whole time, so that's another thing that these cities support. The East-West Valley crossings. How about when you are creating the new airport master plan, what it looks like? I know that the city of Sea-Tac and the people of Sea-Tac really want to have input into that. And I hear that, but just always keep that on the forefront. This impacts them. I'm thinking also like where's the ingress and the egress out of the airport, what those, I've seen the plan recently. And I know that there's great concern that there be an ingress and egress onto Highway 99 that is accessible for people actually driving along Highway 99. I seem to remember that there was some sort of issue with that. So I'm just going to speak in behalf of the cities about the interest of that. That doesn't only help Sea-Tac, that helps us from Tukwila. I don't even get on the freeway to get to the airport. So that's probably enough. I think you're going to probably cover some more of those things. Noise. When I first moved to Tukwila, I could hear the airplanes, and I was like, "Oh my gosh, this is way noisier than I thought it was going to be." And I was sort of, it was depressing, right? That was 1992. Well, instead of getting noisier, it got quieter and quieter. So that was just like I saw that one slide where you had how things are getting quieter. That's something that has been great for the community. However, with all the projections of more and more air traffic at the airport, you just have more planes, even if they're quieter. We're just going to have more noise, and it's going to be more and more during the day. So those are things that are of concern also to the neighborhood. And the only thing that I have specifically about that was brought up was the hush houses for when the engines. That's really important. You can hear those very far away. You can hear them in Tukwila. When they're testing those engines, it's really super loud. And in Tukwila, we get them from Boeing Field and the airport, so we get them both. So, and just speaking for ourselves.
So that's with the hush houses?
You know, I just know that, I don't know. I just hear it.
No, there are no hush houses at either.
There are none, so I just hear it.
Right. So it's the current warm-up maintenance work that you're hearing. So this would be an expression of support for a hush house.
Exactly. And so the other cities can say what they hear. I know in Tukwila we hear them from both airports. So yes, absolutely. That is a quality of life issue for us. And so the final thing that I want to talk about is the fact that at a certain point you can mitigate and you can mitigate, but there's always going to be noise and there's always going to be some pollution. There's always going to be some of this. So we really encourage the port to continue its partnership with the surrounding communities, and that because we're living here, I'll use the word offset. It helps to offset some of that inconvenience that we have. It's like, okay, we have to listen to this noise because there's always going to be a plane, but you're giving out these scholarships to, you're helping our kids. You're doing internships. I heard about all these great internships. And then the program that you have with Highline. Don't forget, Tukwila School District's a different school district. We'd love to see you there too. So, and most of it's Highline, but remember Tukwila too. So those types of things, those partnerships with your community, not just in schools, but with our kids. I want to say thank you to Tom Albro because he brought to the Soundside Alliance a request to do a workforce study to see how we could help our community get better jobs and have better employment. So that study exists now, and we and the port can use that as a resource as to how can the port help help elevate jobs and elevate the standard of living, or the ability, quality of life for those that live here, and that would be specifically by getting better jobs. I'm trying to think of anything else. I talked about the public trust fund. I want to say that again because I think that's a great idea. Just keep involved. Thank you, Mr. Fick, for your involvement and coming out to the different cities and talking to us, the cities around the port. Really appreciate that communication, and encourage you not to do it once, but to just keep that communication going, or to have some of your representatives come out and keep talking to the cities and listening to us. So those are my things. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Kathy. And with that, I'd like to turn it over to Rose Clark, who is a former City of Burien councilwoman and a longtime community participant. She participated in some of the airport's Part 150 studies in the Highline Forum, and most dear to my heart, she's been a tireless advocate for the students of the Highline.
A one-time co-chair of the Highline Forum as well.
Yes.
Welcome.
So thank you very much. Thank you for hosting this conversation. First of all, I want to commend you for the environmental work that you are already doing. It's very important to our communities. We have a lot of things to be happy about. I would not have said that 15 years ago. I would have come and just beat you guys up. But we have a lot of things. The NERA project, I don't know if you've all toured that, but that stormwater facility is really, really great. It shows a great partnership between Burien and the Port of Seattle. I would encourage you to work with other Highline cities. We have some very depressed areas in our communities, and we need to have more economic development. So I know the Sound Side, and I would hope that you continue that very much. One of the things that I think would help our communities, and it's not an environmental thing, I want to explain to you that Burien worked with the Highline School District in 2007, and we created an incentive program. That incentive program was to help provide a rental subsidy for teachers, especially in your STEM subjects that Highline School District would be hiring. It was really great. It was instrumental in several of the new teachers that were hired that year. That's why they chose to come to Highline, was for that subsidy. Unfortunately, we had the 2008 recession, and that was one of the casualties. But if the port could think about something like that, some sort of incentive program to encourage port staff to reside in the Highline communities, I think it would be a big benefit for our communities. We are in what I think of as an information desert. We have had a really great conversation today with looking into the future, a lot of wonderful things that can be happening that would help our communities that live under the airplanes, whether it's noise or air quality. And I would encourage you to think about this kind of conversation taking place within the Highline community so that all of our people that are interested could come. It could be co-chaired by or co-hosted by the Highline Forum. And because we hear noise, we smell fuel, we think this is the way it's going to be forever. And so education is a good thing, and helping people have something to look forward to, that there is a good future for communities here as far as the environment goes, I think would be very helpful. There are still problems with noise. Kathy touched on one, and that is really important. I have never understood why Sea-Tac Airport and Boeing Field do not jointly work together because they both overfly Tukwila. I'm not speaking for Tukwila, but Tukwila gets it both ways. And there should be some sort of partnership. I applaud you for the partnership you have with the Port of Tacoma. If we could think outside the box, maybe we could have something between the two airports. But in Highline, the noise problem is basically at the end of the runways, right when you're coming in on the third runway. You're coming in over houses with your wheels down. There's nothing really you can do to help those folks, and they do not land in the buyout areas anymore. But something needs to be done for those people, because when the planes are low enough that you can see the wheels, they are too low to be where people are living. And there's also noise concerns on the south end of the airport. The run-ups that Kathy alluded to are heard all the way over to our Shorewood community, which is north and west of the airport. North and west? Yeah, north and east of the airport. No, it is northwest. I am terribly directionally challenged. You should have heard what I did to my husband a few times when I was navigator. But anyway, you can hear those run-ups all the way over there. It's about as far away from the airport on the westerly side as Tukwila is on the eastern side. So they do carry a lot of impacts for all the people in between. We are also concerned about new flight paths, new flight tracks. I live in an area, in a home that is almost in the middle of the airport on the north-south basis. So it puzzles me how this can happen, but I can tell you it is happening, that planes are actually flying over my home. And they fly from the south end, and they fly from the north end of the runways. I don't quite get how they do that. Maybe I should take a picture and show you that it really does happen. But the concern is for people when planes are flying over areas where they have not flown over before, and you think at first it's just one or two, so it's not a big deal, and it becomes a big deal when there's 30 or 40 or more a day, and then by then it's too late because FAA says, I'm sorry, this is an established flight track. And that is a problem. The new flight tracks we're seeing, at least in the Burien, Normandy Park areas. The last thing I want to mention is the air quality. If you guys remember back in the 90s, we had a number of people in the Highline area that died of glioblastoma, and we couldn't find a good reason for that. And we got the State Health Department to do a study on in 5 miles around the airport. And they found at that point that the glioblastoma was a blip. It's not something that's sustained over time. However, there is still a large concern in the community about air quality because they smell it. And when they're smelling it, they think it's harming, and they worry about that. You could take a lot of stress off of the people that live near the airport just by doing an air quality study similar to what was done at LAX and subsequently, I think, in Atlanta, where a University of Washington, our University of Washington, team went down there with mobile equipment and found instead of the pollution being just right close in around the airport, it actually was carried further away. If you think about the plume from the Arsarco smelter, it didn't just stop with landing on Burien, it went further to the foothills of the mountains. I think that's probably what's happening with pollution from the airport. So I would encourage you to talk to the University of Washington. I can email you contact information. So we could do a similar study here. The cost is less than $75,000. And it would really I'm sure I know you're using cleaner fuels. I'm sure that it's going to be borne out that it is, that our air quality is better than it was 20 years ago. But our community needs data to understand that and to really internalize that and relax a little. For us, the airport, because of the noise and the potential air pollution, is a big stressor for our community. And the last thing is just for me all by myself. And that is we've had ongoing off and on conversations about oil trains and coal trains going through our communities. And I do not understand why it wouldn't be possible. I know it's a commerce problem that one airport or one region can't deal with on their own, but I really don't understand why it wouldn't be possible for the Port of Seattle, for the City of Seattle and King County to jointly write a resolution stating that the values of this community, our whole region here, does not support coal trains and oil trains moving through highly populated areas. And it doesn't carry any legal weight, but it's a statement of intention that we know this is happening, but it's really not what the Northwest is about. So that's it. I want to thank you again for hosting us, and really thank you for all of the environmental programs that you are partners with other folks. And again, it would be nice if the informational desert around Highline got some really good information, such as we have heard today, so they know the big picture of what's going on. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you, Rose. And with that, I'd like to turn it over to Maria Barriola, who is the Vice Chair of the North Beacon Hill Community Council and a longtime community leader who has recently led an effort to voice concerns about airport noise and emissions in her community.
Good afternoon, Commissioners, and thank you for the opportunity to be here. I'd like to just be clear that I am not here representing the North Beacon Hill Council, but rather I'm here as co-chair of CHAC, which is Community Health Advocates Collaboration. We felt that coalition would be too high of a bar, but we have a lot to collaborate on. Yeah. So I hope you have the same few pagers, because realizing that I have 3 minutes, I'm just going to zoom through it, I suppose. Our approach is environmental justice. As you know, you're talking a lot about what the environment is. Where the environmental justice comes in is the composition of our residents in Beacon Hill. So in environmental justice, the idea is to include and engage all communities to gain equal benefits and mitigate the harm. In poorer communities, that's where you have a lot more of dumping infrastructure that other communities won't tolerate. So why am I talking about Beacon Hill? Because there is mitigation available for communities that are close by the airport. We are not that close to the airport. And as I talk this through, it'll become clear that there are rules that do not allow us to be eligible for mitigation. And we have taken the initiative to speak to all of the different airports that impact us so that we can be good neighbors, so to speak. In Beacon Hill, we have about 39,000 plus residents. We're the largest neighborhood in Seattle. We administered a 6-language survey, which will be closing the end of this month. And we have about 12,000 plus households. 80% of our people are people of color, and that is 50% Asians, 22% African and African American, and 8% Latino. And 44% of our residents are born outside the United States. So if you think about some of the South Asian immigrants and refugees, you can also imagine potential post-traumatic stress reaction to the sounds of the airplanes that are coming through. 29% use a language other than English. So in terms of our poverty level, this is part of the environmental justice piece, 1 out of every 5 is below the poverty rate in parts of the neighborhood. 1 out of 4, or 25% of our 25-year-olds and up, lack a high school diploma, as compared to Seattle, 7%, and King County, 8%. In terms of vulnerable population, we have a higher percentage of children, 8%, as compared to the city of Seattle, and over 12.3% of our residents are 65 years of age. And many of our folks are likely to not have any insurance unless they have Medicare. So in looking at the adverse health status, utilizing King County public health data, we have the highest rate of household income, below the 100% of federal poverty level, highest infant mortality rate, highest number of deaths due to diabetes, mellitus, and stroke, highest number of adults age 65 who are not vaccinated, and highest number of adults without health insurance. We have a significantly higher rate of chronic lower respiratory deaths, including asthma, and this was a survey done by phone in English, so we're suspecting that there's probably more, and the highest asthma hospitalization rates for 2 of our predominant zip codes in Beacon Hill. So in front of you, I'm not going to talk this through, but really, what is the causation from noise to acute effects to chronic effects of hypertension, reduced learning and productivity? This is on page, it's noted as page 2, reduced learning and productivity and doctrinal disruption, and the long-term risk is heart disease and permanent hearing loss and tinnitus. So here's the kicker. Beacon Hill is below the 65 day and night level airplane noise contour to qualify for mitigation. And that came from a Port of Seattle presentation. However, in the City of Seattle proposed 2035 comprehensive plan, middle of Beacon Hill, just on traffic noise contours, register at 55 to 75 decibels. So we don't have a combined cumulative study on noise. And what we know is that the increase in flights when NextGen and Greener Skies were implemented, and you have a visual on the next one. What is important to realize that as much as it improved conditions for a lot of other neighborhoods, because Beacon Hill geographically is a mesa, it's a bluff. When you're taking off, the angle of taking off and the angle of coming down, you are actually coming closer to the airplanes are actually much, much closer. And the projected rate of increase is 2.3 annual rate for the study on NextGen and Greener Skies. And the Port of Seattle report, they came and gave us a briefing at the North Beacon Hill Council, was that it's the increase from 2012 to 2015 is actually 26.4% increase. So this is on a compounding basis. And of course, the projected more aircraft on the airfield during peak hours in the Sea-Tac master plan, estimates for 2034 is 36%. So again, you're layering and layering. We really need to have a cumulative noise study, because if you look at the geography of Beacon Hill, on the north, you're bordered with the I-90. On the west side, you have the trains running. You've got I-5, and then you have 4 different airports. You've got Sea-Tac, you've got Renton, King County International Airport, and Boeing. So that's an absolute need that we have. Moving forward, in terms of the air quality and emission, the statements here in terms of health effects are from larger studies and King County studies. So air toxics, the health effects, cancer, birth defects, lung damage, immune system damage, and nerve damage. In Beacon Hill, the cancer risk is very high. It's comparable in the range to the Duwamish site, which is a Superfund site. And the Puget Sound clean air folks have determined that mobile sources such as cars, trucks, buses, ships, planes, and trains, and wood-burning stoves are the main contributors to the air pollution health risk in the region. So understanding that, we are beginning to understand a new phenomena for us, a new concern, which is ultrafine particles. These are nanoparticles that permeate at a cellular level. For some of us, I'm not a scientist, so I need to think in metaphors. So asbestos, for example, is an ultrafine particle. Animal and human studies show respiratory and cardiovascular effects associated with exposure to ultrafine particles, as well as their interactions with tissue and cells, including translocation beyond the lung and even into the brain, affecting neurological development. The EPA funded the ultrafine particle studies in Los Angeles International Airport, and I believe Honorable Clark talked about that from the noise level. The same Professor Tim Larson from the University of Washington was one of the leads. Team Gould is the person who implemented the, along with, there's another professor who implemented the measurement portions of it. What they showed is a 4-fold concentration of ultrafine particles 6 miles downwind of the Los Angeles airport. Beacon Hill, because it's long, is 3 to 8 miles of Sea-Tac in King County International Airport. There's a picture following this page, just to give you a sense. This is from Professor Larson's learning session. From the initial meeting that we had with the different airports, we had a follow-on learning session. What you see in the airplane flying down are 2 vortices that are created, and basically the ultrafine particle comes from the soot. As the airplane takes off and lands, the vortices are closer to the ground, so to speak, as it's moving. So the ultrafine particles do not disperse, they do not disappear. They actually come down to the ground. So they come down on the tops of homes, in parks, open spaces, and whatnot. And in conversations with Dr. Larson, I was asking about what kinds of interventions might be applicable. So for example, we know that in noise you can insulate a home. And he says, well, insulating a home is not necessarily effective because ultrafine particles are on the outside of the home as well as on the ground. And if you come to Beacon Hill, we finally had a wonderful upgraded Jefferson Community Park, which is like the gathering place of all the babies and the mommies and children running around. So given that new concern, what we're trying to do is we want to pursue an ultrafine particle study. Professor Larson is willing to donate his time as the primary investigator, and we're gathering a lot of in-kind contributions such that the actual cost of the study is going to be around $40,000, but we're actually clocking the in-kind closer to $130,000 on top. So I'm looking for money right now, and we are also a finalist for an EPA grant for community education and mobilization. It would be really important to do the ultrafine study so that it's included in the educational piece. And the proposal is that it's going to be a 1-year study to take into consideration the seasons and, we are rain and what that does and so forth. So what do we want in conclusion? We appreciate the fact that you want to be a good neighbor, that you are a good neighbor in many, many different ways, aside from being an economic driver, a community convener. Airports are really significant to our immigrant population. You're connectors to our sense of global identity, and also the fact that you are taking the environmental issues at heart and being progressive about it. Second is we want you to engage our community, including our concerns in your planning. The fact that we are here tells us that you appreciate us as a neighbor. In terms of the noise, we would appreciate your support in our efforts to get a cumulative noise study that does include all the different forms of transportation besides airplanes. With regards to the toxics, I am never too proud to ask for money. We're asking for the $40,000 because we can raise a lot of the in-kind donations, so to speak. And the fifth one is, it looks like the biofuels are really highly promising, because if it eliminates the soot, the carbon, it'll eliminate ultrafine particles. I'm a mom, I have an ADHD kid. He's born and raised in Beacon Hill. We don't know. So our usual Euro science-based approach in policymaking is we wait until the numbers are in. And I don't think we have that kind of time. And so this is an imminent for us. And it's not just for us individually, but really it's a larger community, because if we establish ultrafine particle is harmful, not with a Beacon Hill study, it applies everywhere. And of course, to support our quest for a cumulative noise and air health study. Without the ULP, ultrafine particle, without having a cumulative noise study, we cannot move to getting King County to do a health study, because it would be incomplete. Thank you for your attention.
Yeah, I just wanted to thank, especially the three of you, for being here. Maria and I are neighbors up in Beacon Hill. Well, used to be neighbors, I guess, and I've known Kathy for several years. I just wanted to say that I hope that the staff is, I know that you're taking good notes, and that we can come up with a more comprehensive and cumulative plan to address community concerns, because you each have brought up different things, and some of them overlap, but not all. And I know I've said to a few of you, I'm the only commissioner that lives south of I-90, and so I feel like we're not in districts, but I certainly understand the concerns of the south end, and being a Beacon Hill resident, I absolutely hear every single day the airplane noise. I have many recordings that I've been taking over the last few months of it. I'm not going to play them today. However, I do realize that it is part of living in the neighborhood, and it's a part of our community is having this airport. So we have to find that balance between having an operational airport that helps connect us to the world and have those jobs, but also find a way to mitigate some of the negative impacts. So again, each of you brought up some really great points. We need to find a way to more collectively start to address some of those things. So I just want to say thank you.
I really appreciate the breadth of the concerns that you have, and obviously funding is critical to accomplish the identification of mitigations, if not the nature of the impacts. And I just was aware of a couple of things that just came up, and since you have a lot of matching funds, non-federal funds, this sort of leverages the ability to get things. And I understand the FAA itself funds these sort of studies, that if you have a match, it significantly increases that chance. Now, obviously, having the port's, political or financial help in talking to the FAA, I'm sure would only help. But the other thing, as I just heard on the news today, was that because of the Volkswagen illicit activities with their cars, there's going to be a multi-billion-dollar fund.
As a owner.
So yeah, she's going to get 10 grand out of it. But the fact of the matter is, there's this huge fund, and I think the more specific it is to particulates and things like that. Now, from the time they create the fund and know how to disperse it is government-related, so I'm not promising you that's tomorrow, but I think getting in on it early, and a one-year study, you probably want to, find a way to maintain such a monitoring. And so anyway, I'm very sympathetic to your concerns, and I'm a big data guy, so if we can help you, that would be great.
And Maria, if I could just say that you sort of sheepishly mentioned that Beacon Hill falls outside the FAA's 65 DNL noise boundary. And it is true that, the communities closer to the airport obviously get the biggest impacts, but, I think my fellow commissioners will confirm this, we get emails far afield in places all around King County, with concerns about noise, concerns about, airport emissions, airport noise. So, we want to be a good neighbor to everyone, and that includes Beacon Hill, that includes other communities around King County, and not, particularly the airport communities, but more than just the airport communities. So really want to thank you for your advocacy. And, but we still have one very important panelist, and who represents a great partner to the airport.
It's just the environmental issue.
Do you mind if I just ask a quick question before? I'm so sorry. Maria, you and thank you all. You started out by mentioning you had a 6-language survey. I thought you said that was closing at the end of the month. So that was not how you pulled these demographics. This is from other, what's the?
Those for analysis, I'm going to pass this over to you. We asked one of the items you asked the community is the importance of a cumulative health study to them. So I should have those numbers by the middle of July for you.
Oh, that's great. Okay, thank you. That's what.
Thank you, Maria. So our final presenter today is Vlad Gutman from Climate Solutions and a member of the Port's Energy and Sustainability Policy Committee. And he's going to talk about their broad view around environmental issues, climate in particular, and the role the Port might play. So, Vlad?
Thank you very much. I appreciate the opportunity to talk to you folks today, and it's meaningful that you guys host forums like this to learn about issues that that the Port has a direct impact on. You know, for nearly 20 years, Climate Solutions is focused on pursuing practical solutions to global warming. You know, we've partnered with businesses, local and state government, ports across the Pacific Northwest to examine meaningful changes to achieve pollution reductions. And the Port of Seattle has been a long-standing partner in this work, as been mentioned, helping advance advanced aviation fuels, and taking meaningful steps in promoting electrification, especially for the ground support vehicles. Those are meaningful and positive steps in the right direction and set an example for other airports across the country. While I'll focus on some other thoughts today, I just want to subscribe to previous comments that have been made on the importance of biofuels and their adoption. Just endorse the work being done. It's a really meaningful part of the global climate solution. You know, more and more as Climate Solutions looks at our areas of opportunity and need, we have come to the conclusion that the transportation sector poses the greatest challenge in Washington State, the ground transportation sector. Transportation is responsible for about half of Washington State's total emissions, partly as a result of the clean electric power grid that the Port is a beneficiary of through the Bonneville Power Administration. And because the airport is such a major source and destination for vehicle traffic, as well as being responsible for substantial emissions of its own through various vehicles that it operates, there's a real opportunity to make a very positive impact on the region-wide climate picture by taking meaningful steps to address opportunities here. You know, I don't want to dwell too much on this, but over the last couple of years, also Climate Solutions has really come to a greater focus on equity as well in kind of the climate change conversation. Obviously, climate change itself has disproportionate impacts on communities of color and low-income communities, but as we've heard a lot today from a number of sources, the communities around the Port are very impacted by the combustion of fossil fuels as well. You know, we've talked a lot about the aviation impacts of that, the combustion of aviation fuels, jet fuels, but a big part of that as well, and as I said, that the Port can really have a big impact on is the ground transportation that comes to, from, and operates on the grounds of the airport. So just, you know, first a word, you know, for us, a big focus to achieve solutions in this space has been electrification of transit. And before I get into some potential solutions, I just want to kind of just say a word about technology, which is that, you know, we have it. Currently available on the market, there are a number of bus options that are fully electric. King County has deployed a bus that goes 28 miles on a single charge and recharges in about 10 minutes. Other options will charge up and do a 200-mile range on a single charge. A company called BYD this year rolled out vans and electric trucks that will carry 7 to 100,000 pounds and will travel between 100 and 160 miles in a single charge. And at the end of the year, Chevrolet will roll out the Bolt, which will go 200 miles on a single charge. Now, just for a point of comparison, the average taxi in the United States travels between 150 and 200 miles in a single day. So the Chevrolet Bolt will be able to handle that entire duty cycle on a single charge. And then to layer on top of that, you know, estimates vary, but the consensus is the total cost of ownership of these vehicles is across the board lower than their fossil fuel counterparts. Electric buses, even after their higher upfront investment, end up saving owners about $400,000 over their lifetime. That is especially the case for the Port, potentially, which is a beneficiary of the clean and extremely cheap power that you receive from Bonneville. I note all this to make a point, which is that an aggressive electrification agenda is both environmentally sound, but it's also financially prudent today without further advances in technology, and that's only going to change over the coming years. So a couple potential areas to explore. One is the owned fleet. You know, my understanding is that the Port operates compressed natural gas for its rental car shuttles. CNG vehicles provide clear air quality benefits, burning much cleaner with fewer particulate emissions than their diesel counterparts. But a lot of studies over the last couple of years have shown that their climate change benefits are not as clear. Especially when considering a well-to-wheel analysis, CNG has been found to be as bad or even worse than their diesel alternatives. Spokane Transit completed a study at the end of last year that found that a CNG bus will actually emit 12% more greenhouse-sensitive gases than a diesel alternative, which is a pretty unusual the science backs that up, but it's not the people's impressions of that technology.
Vlad, do you know exactly why it is that's the case? Is it inefficiency, or is it spillage, leakage of?
So it's both. So CNG within the engine, within an internal combustion engine, is extremely inefficient and it has leakage. But even it's just operation within that engine is comparatively inefficient. What we've been learning over the last several years through a variety of independent EPA studies and things like that, part of the reason it's important to talk about a well-to-wheel analysis is the supply chain of natural gas. Fugitive leaks at wells are a rampant problem that there is very few known affordable solutions to. Leaks along the pipeline only aggravate that. And methane, the chief component, is obviously a much more intensive greenhouse gas than carbon. The duty cycle of the airport's rental car shuttles is ideally suited to electric buses. Because they cover a short circular route, it would be comparatively easy to install a few fast chargers in a single location. The bus could stop every several loops with minimal impact to users, and it would maximize the power source that the port currently enjoys. This would reduce the criteria pollutants that they emit, but it would also reduce greenhouse emissions. If the Port of Seattle wanted to, it could decide today to never again buy another fossil fuel bus, and that would be a really meaningful and impactful step. To connect to that and to kind of maximize that impact is the similar benefits that can be realized for buses delivering passengers to the airport. We talked about the efficiency of passenger miles of public transit buses. This would be a major solution to that. While those buses are operated by agencies like Metro and Sound Transit, expressing the port's preference for battery buses would be extremely significant. But the port can do more than just encourage. If there was a decision made to electrify the rental car fleet, the rental shuttle fleet, that could easily be a partnership between a partnership around that electrification can happen with with Sound Transit and Metro to lower costs for the port in making that transition. Assist the agencies in bringing electric bus service to the airport as well, and save both parties a significant amount of money, making the transition that much easier. To switch away from buses, it's useful to talk about the parking of single occupancy vehicles, parking of vehicles. The port is doing some great stuff in this space. There's 48 level 1 chargers at the airport. It's a great start, especially given that they don't charge, those chargers are free to use for customers. And it is especially useful for long-term parking. A level 1 charger has a very slow charge. It's equal to a common outlet plug. And to get 40 miles out of one of those plugs, it would take about 9 hours. So if you want to go to Everett, it would take 9 hours to charge on one of those port chargers. Airport chargers. If a car is parked overnight, that's sufficient, but if a vehicle comes to pick up a relative or something like that, a higher power charger would be really useful. But in thinking about those kinds of opportunities, again, as we talked about with buses, I think it's useful to explore ways to maximize that benefit as well. Other single occupancy vehicles that have a significant emissions impact that are regular users of the port are taxis, for-hire vehicles, and the ride-sharing companies like Uber and Lyft. Here I want to repeat what I said at the top, which is the technology exists today to handle this conversion. Available electric vehicles can handle an entire daily route with maybe 1 charge on a fast charge facility, which could be done in about 20 minutes. At today's gas prices and at the cost of these cars, it would take just over 2 years to pay back the initial upfront investment for the purchaser of the taxi. If gas rises to $3 a gallon, as it's likely to, the payback falls to below 2 years. And as the cost of these vehicles continues to fall, that payback will get shorter still. So what can the Port of Seattle do? The Port of Seattle has very carefully structured contracts with its with for-hire and the TNC companies. that mandate well-thought-out key performance indicator formulas to require efficient driving by those vehicles that combines deadheading standards and combines fuel efficiency standards and the like. The airport should explore tightening the environmental key performance indicators to require higher fuel efficiency in a predictable way, publicly pursuing a policy that would yield full electric within a decade, for example, allowing companies and individuals who seek to serve the airport to incorporate those requirements in purchasing decisions as they replace their fleet. And while increasing these standards, the airport can also facilitate the transition by building DC fast charging locations for taxi and private vehicles to use on airport grounds. The Port of Seattle will be able to charge a fair price for the power, recouping costs for the installation, generating additional revenue, and still saving drivers money compared to gasoline. The impact would be significant. Because Sea-Tac is such a major source of business across the Puget Sound region, requiring this conversion at the airport would lead to the deployment of hundreds of new all-electric cars and major turnover of all taxis and for-hire cars in the region. These cars would have zero tailpipe emissions, which would have a substantial impact on particulate matter and some of the other issues we were already discussing, reducing both their greenhouse impacts and their criteria pollutant emissions along major transportation corridors. And they would demonstrate to millions of customers living in and visiting Washington that electric vehicles are a real option. There's no better advertisement for the technology than driving in it. And while a significant step, it's worth noting that it would not be the first time that Sea-Tac did this. It was the first major airport to achieve a green fleet in the early 2000s, leading to significant adoption of hybrid and other clean vehicles. Sea-Tac is used to driving this kind of significant technological change, and it should do so again.
And Vlad, if I could just ask a question on charger stations. So you read articles about how down in California, there's enough of a critical mass now of electric cars that people are fighting over the use of charging stations, unplugging and, one unplugging their car in. And so if we did go to more, quick charging type stations, you wouldn't want someone who's going to, say, fly to Austin for a week to, park and camp out.
Absolutely.
Spot. So now, I assume there's technology to have meters, or?
There are, so you can, based on how long they're plugged in, they charge, per minute, for example, rate, for example, that's how a lot of the business models for those charging stations exist now. The suggestion here, I think, in terms of being able to facilitate, for example, taxis and for-hire vehicles to stop in, wouldn't necessarily be at the garage. Maybe it'd be adjacent to the garage, so it wouldn't be just at a traditional parking spot, because obviously having somebody go on vacation for 2 weeks and using a station that is useful for 20 minutes is not the most efficient use of that kind of resource.
Although we have gotten emails from electric car owners saying, hey, when are you going to adopt quick charging technology?
It would be a really big deal. It just wouldn't be located in the garage. It would probably be located somewhere where it's easier to pull off, for example, on the roadways in. A fast charge, on a fast charger, you can refill even some of the bigger batteries in 20 minutes. It's like a stop at a gas station. What that means is that it's not significantly changing your lifestyle. I mean, it's just like having to fill up, as I said. So the turnover on those would be more significant. If a taxi wanted to use them, it would come in, it would stop for 10 minutes, and it would continue on its way. So I do think it would be applicable, and it's a way to facilitate the transition, which paired with a mandate would be really impactful, I think. And then I think just the last recommendation of a place to look is the agreements that the Port of Seattle has with rental car agencies that obviously provide a lot of cars to visitors, and that have leasing agreements, is my understanding, with the airport. Looking at ways as those get renegotiated and extended to include higher efficiency standards, requiring more deployment of hybrid vehicles and maybe electric vehicles at those rental car agencies would be a really big deal. These are just some initial thoughts, but the outsized role that the airport plays in the economic life of the region means that it can have an outsized impact on the conversion to cleaner technology in the transportation sector. Really appreciate your commitment here.
Thank you. Commissioner Bowman?
Yeah, just really quick. Thank you for your comments.
Yep.
And I would say, in case you're not aware, the program that we have with the TNC's Transportation Network Connectors is a pilot program.
Yeah.
And I really wish that you were here 6 months ago when we were talking about it, because that is exactly my point is, during that conversation about whether those vehicles would have the same CAFE standards that we currently require of
Right.
the taxis. So as that pilot program wraps up next year, I really hope that you guys continue to be more engaged to push us in the right direction. And then secondly, would really love for you to get more engaged as well in the expansion of Sound Transit and helping us find ways to get people to use the system that we already have coming to the airport. I talk about it every opportunity that I get, but it is the single best way to get to the airport. It's $2.50, and it's already running, and it's by far and away the most environmentally friendly way to get here. And as we continue to increase our passenger count, we need to continue to get people on those trains. Would love your help in highlighting that service. People know about it. They just, once they take it, they're committed to taking it again because they see how easy it is. But we need folks like your organization to help get the word out to the community.
I took it today.
Thank you.
Commissioner Gregoire.
Yeah, and I thank you for your participation here and for all of your support. I'd love your thinking on the social justice impacts about what you're talking about doing to the ground transportation fleet, if that makes sense. So I heard, and this is what I resonated for me, a 10-year roadmap that gets you to an all-electric fleet for taxis, for hire, and TNC. I am one of those people who thought we had to actually make sure we had a model cafe for the TNC environments, recognizing that some of those are part-time workers who are not investing in thinking of that capital fleet. I cared that the Burien student who is going to work for 4 hours this week to pay their community college tuition has the ability to make that income. It's a challenge that I think we wrestled with for over a year, but I hear what you're saying in terms of the value of having the goal we've got in mind and giving the clear timeline to get there. But, you know, you've been helpful to us as we've thought about how you roadmap that out in other contexts. We could use some help thinking about when all this ground transportation continues.
Right.
What's that look like? How we give certainty to the marketplace, how we explain to drivers, and what that means, to be perfectly frank, as a social justice impact as well as an environmental impact.
Yeah, no, I think that's right, and I think for that reason, for hire and taxi is the easier place to make some of those changes up front without having some of those direct impacts. You know, the multi-year paybacks that I talked about were based on a 70,000 miles per year. Travel, which is what an average taxi about does, according to national statistics and things like that. So. That is obviously longer if you are, doing it kind of off the side of your desk, essentially, as an additional way to generate revenue. But I would also say that, part of the reason I said a decade, the suggestion was a decade, is because that provides a lot more time for the technology to advance. $3 a 3-year payback on a taxi is right now, with a $35,000 car, with the federal benefits and things like that, with current levels of prices for gas and prices for electricity. That really comes down. If you look at, for example, how the Toyota Prius, after it rolled out, now it's around in the low 20s, $23,000, $24,000. If you look at the way that trajectory and the prices came, it is an extremely aggressive reduction over time, and we've seen the electric vehicles are dropping even faster. So a 10-year time frame, and I think that there's math to do on how to reconcile some of this, but I think a 10-year time frame is intended to kind of build in some of that turnover effect. So it's not about getting rid of an existing car; it's about making a choice on a replacement vehicle.
Commissioner Fellman.
Thank you for your partnership at the port for a long time. It's Climate Solutions is a great partner. So the thing that I was just thinking about in terms of the going to an electric fleet, I was just at the Clean Tech Alliance meeting yesterday, and at the King County's Got Green conference, and the cities showcasing their hybrid buses.
Yeah.
And it just seems to me that if, and I think the rent-a-car buses, things that never leave the system would, even though short mileage, but it's resident, these are, low-hanging fruit that I think could directly impact the local communities as well as the total sum. But doesn't it make some sense for us to be partnering with the surrounding jurisdictions to have, from a maintenance perspective, from a group purchase expense, if we have similar technologies that we sort of try to evolve together. And I'm just wondering, in terms of, leapfrogging into a realm where, it depends on how much of a leadership role versus how much of a efficiency and scale we can achieve.
Yeah, I think the answer to that question is, I like the answer to this question because you can be both a leader and a follower, so meaning you mitigate the risk. The buses, for example, that King County bought, they're 3 Proterra Catalyst buses. They're the 28-mile short-range fast-charging buses. They're on WashDOT's approved vehicle list. There's other buses that are out there and other technology that are out there that aren't on those lists and that are potentially more of a gamble. But there's some confidence that comes with the fact that these are WashDOT approved vehicles. Confidence both in terms of the technology, but also because those are basically negotiated at a rate because they're on an approved purchase list. So some of that is built into just a service the state provides, which is great. In doing that, but that's not to minimize the impacts, which is deploying more of these vehicles means putting more chargers on the grid, which is very substantial. They're heavy-duty chargers that cost more money than a single occupancy vehicle one. So it really makes it easier. Getting over that initial hump makes it easier for all the communities essentially to be able to pull together and achieve it in total. Which is why I was suggesting that rather than if the port were to decide to electrify its rental car fleet, which I think is low-hanging fruit. It's a financial win. It's an important step to take. Doing it in a way that partners with Sound Transit and Metro to make sure that maybe potentially they're able to use those chargers as well and electrify some of the buses that travel around the airport and Tequila and things like that would maximize those benefits far beyond just those specific vehicles being replaced.
Commissioner Albro.
Well, I've been holding fire to give everybody a chance to get through the long panel discussion today, and I really appreciate everyone hanging in there, especially the 4 of you. I'm sorry Kathy had to leave, but many good ideas, and I just really want to emphasize that they're completely aligned we're completely aligned with each other. I think if you look at the Century Agenda, in that we adopted some pretty lofty goals, environmental, economic development, and otherwise, and so. It's really helpful to continue these conversations and actually take a couple more steps down the path. What I think is also particularly helpful is the specific ideas. So in our Century Agenda, for instance, we talk about reducing carbon emissions from port operations by 50% and reducing air pollutant emissions by 50% from 2005 levels, where we don't qualify that. So I think the suggestions for some specific studies are welcome and kind of in alignment with, we recognize the kinds of things that we need to do. What I'm going to, my ask is continue to stay engaged with us with your specific ideas and also help us kind of navigate the choices we have, because we can't do everything all at once, right? We've got to kind of pick and choose and be very methodical in order to get to the end point that I think we're all reaching for. So help us understand where those immediate opportunities are, where immediate needs are, so we can prioritize our work and be most effective. And I know our staff is working very hard on this. We have excellent leadership. I want to commend everybody who's working on it. But really, it's the partnerships with the communities that really help us hone what we're doing to be what's most impactful and most useful. So keep this coming. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
And Biz, if I could bring you into the conversation. So Vlad had a number of really good suggestions on opportunities we could pursue, and not only with regard to the rental car fleet, but working with the rental car bus fleet, but working with the rental car companies on their fleets of cars. And I think I remember when we opened up the rental car facility in 2011, 2012 timeframe, the agreements we inked with the rental car companies had at least some aspirational language in there in terms of working with them to convert their fleets to more fuel efficient or hybrid technology. And
Yeah,
remember that? And
yeah, we did have conversations with the rental car company at the time, and they were of course very interested in making sure there was going to be a market for the electric vehicles, and we were watching experiences at other airports where they required electric vehicles and they sat unrented. So that has obviously changed quite a bit, and I think, as we move forward with the rental car companies in the future, there'll be new opportunities because technology has changed so vastly.
Can I just suggest to our team, we got to figure out a way to expedite that, because I think the rental car timelines, I think I'd be dead before those contracts reopen. Seriously. So we have to figure out a different way to have that conversation.
Yeah, we'll take that off. Yep, thank you.
Great.
Well,
Further
thank
comments?
you very much.
Maria?
I'd like to make one comment about the electric cars or the quiet cars. When I was diversity manager, I had a blind employee who told me that that was a danger to them. So some sounds need to be added so people who are blind or limited vision can know that they're around.
Good point.
May I make one more comment? I want to thank you 100 times over for planting elm trees along Des Moines Memorial Drive. It's my pet project. It's a World War I drive dedicated to the fallen from Washington State for World War I. And I didn't even have to come and bug you. You did it. So thank you.
Right. Well, we try at least. All right, well, Rose, Maria, and Vlad, thank you very much for participating. Thank you for your input, and I hope you will remain engaged as this process goes along. Mr. Fick.
Commission President Creighton, I'd like to invite Lance Little up to the podium at this time. There's been some breaking news since the meeting began earlier today at 1:12. Lance?
Good afternoon, Commissioners. I'd like to bring you up to speed, as CEO Fick said, and an incident that occurred not too long ago at Istanbul, Turkey, at the airport. There's been an apparent suicide, bombing attack. The reports that we have are that it involved multiple suicide bombers, and there's been shooting and bombing as well. The reports that we have also states that there's been multiple deaths as well as injuries. Also, and we will keep you abreast as we get additional information. We've been working very closely with the port police, the FBI, CBP, TSA here at the airport as well. So we are being very vigilant and keeping abreast of this situation as it unfolds.
Commissioner Bowen?
I just want to say thank you, Lance. It's just the news had come across my computer, and I appreciate you digging into it right away. Every time there's an incident in an airport, I think the first question that our residents and citizens have are, what are we doing at Sea-Tac to keep us safe? I know we have a lot of initiatives. We don't need to go into them today, but appreciate that maybe at the next meeting or just by via different types of communication, we can remind people of all of the security measures that we do have at Sea-Tac. And our hearts and prayers go out to the families that were affected.
Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner Bowman. And also in terms of our traveling public, I think it bears reminding everyone to stay alert to their surroundings and report anything suspicious.
Thank you. Thank you, Lance.
Thank you.
Okay, I'm going to move on to our last new special item of business, item 3D, City of Seattle Draft Freight Master Plan. Jerry Poor will introduce our presenters today from SDOT.
All right. Well, thank you all for your patience. We have a busy agenda today.
Yep.
And good afternoon, Commissioners, CEO Fick. We're pleased to have our colleagues from the City of Seattle presenting today on the Freight Master Plan, known affectionately as the FMP. The city and the port have shared a number of work efforts recently and successes, such as the designation of our new heavy haul network, restart on design and a funding strategy for the Lander Street overpass, cooperation on various intelligent transportation system implementation projects, and completion of the Industrial Areas Freight Access Project, the year before last, which laid some of the groundwork for this city freight master plan. Over the past 2 years, Port staff and Northwest Seaport Alliance staff have participated with other partners on the advisory committee for the FMP, myself, Christine Wolf of the Alliance, and Linda Stirk before us. And this first freight master plan is in draft form. We'll be submitting port comments by July 8th, and then the city will submit a recommended plan to the council adoption later this summer. So we look forward to hearing from you today.
Good afternoon, Port Commissioners. Thanks so much for having us here today. I'm Kevin O'Neill. I'm a planning manager in SDOT, and I manage the team that led the Freight Master Plan and actually leads all of our modal master plans, the Transit Master Plan, Pedestrian Master Plan, Bicycle Master Plan. I'm joined by my colleague Gabriela Vega, who was our project manager on the plan. So I'm going to just sort of jump right in if I can figure out how to advance the slide. So maybe you should do that. So what we want to do today is just really give you a high-level overview of the Freight Master Plan. And I think the first slide we've been starting with all our briefings is, well, why did we do an FMP and why is it important? And kind of what we said and been saying to multiple audiences across the city is it's important for a number of reasons. One, first and foremost, goods need to move and be delivered throughout the entire city of Seattle to neighborhood business districts, et cetera. Also, freight, as you well know, is incredibly important to the local economy and incredibly important to the state economy. I don't have to tell the port commissioners that we are the most trade-dependent state in the country. We are, the city of Seattle is home to many of the Port of Seattle facilities. It's home to 2 designated manufacturing industrial centers, which have over 60,000 jobs between the 2 of them, most of those being in the Duwamish Manufacturing Industrial Center. And really, we wanted to make sure we had a network that served all of the various needs for freight, both delivering to and from the industrial centers, but also delivering to and from neighborhood business districts, which is incredibly important.
Kevin, can I just jump in there and tell you how much I appreciate the city emphasizing that? First off, I have been a resident of the city of Seattle since 1980, and proudly so. So, you know, I just think that one of the things that the city of Seattle really benefits from is being the premier city in Washington State, and with that comes a certain responsibility to the rest of Washington State, because so much of what happens economically throughout our state has a dependency on the city of Seattle. And so really recognizing that and making that part of the introduction of what we do or what you're doing and why this is important, I just think is a good reminder for all of us who live in the city of Seattle. So I just wanted to applaud that and let you know how much I appreciate it.
Yeah, thanks for that comment. And I think it's notable to your comment that when we started this project, we were looking at other models for city or municipal freight plans. There aren't that many of them. You know, freight plans, as you know, are typically done by either state DOTs or, regional agencies. But I think the reason why we wanted to do a city freight plan is in recognition of just what you talked about. So thank you for that comment. So the Freight Master Plan is similar to all of our other modal master plans, is that we're really looking long range. We're looking 20 years out to what are the needs we have to improve goods movement and delivery throughout the city. And all of our modal master plans have kind of the same general framework. We want to identify a network. Where do we want that particular mode, in this case freight, to move? We also want to identify a lot of programmatic things that we can do as an agency and as a city to improve freight mobility. And one of the things our council really looks for in all of our modal master plans is how are we going to prioritize what we do? How are we going to prioritize what we do in year 1, 2, 3, and 4 with the funding we have? And I do want to point out that, as you know very well, there are a lot of ways that freight moves around our city and region. The Freight Master Plan is really focused primarily on trucks simply because we, as SDOT, have the most control over the city street system. But we certainly acknowledge all of the other ways that freight moves throughout the city. So just really quickly, we started this project, as Jerry talked about, in late 2014. We worked with our committee to kind of build the bones of the plan in 2015, did a lot of community outreach throughout all of these different efforts. And where we are now is we have issued a public review draft, which looks like this. of the plan. Your staff has hard copies of it. We're now seeking public comments, and then we really hope, and Gabriella will talk about this later, to work with the mayor's office to transmit the plan to council for their approval later this summer. That's kind of our goal here. So when we started this effort, we're kind of generalist transportation planners. So we have people in SDOT who work a lot on freight and have over the years, but we really wanted to educate ourselves about what were the issues out there. So we met with a lot of both individuals and organizations, including talking to people who drive trucks around the city to find out, well, what are the issues out there? And we learned a lot about both freight mobility, moving goods, but also delivering goods, and a lot of the barriers that people run into when they're just trying to get the goods from the truck into the store or the building. We also pulled our advisory committee together during this time, and they've been working with us throughout that whole effort, and we really appreciate Jerry and Christine's involvement. They've come to pretty much every meeting and have provided great insight to the port and freight operations throughout the city. And then we thought it was really important to talk to not just our freight stakeholders, but all of our advisory boards, so pedestrian advisory board, bicycle advisory board, the planning commission. We've done a number of briefings for the planning commission. They're very strongly supportive of this plan and the idea of doing the plan for all the reasons that you mentioned, and have talked to a lot of business associations. So one of the things we did early on is kind of develop our policy framework, which is really kind of what are we trying to do with this? And so we worked with our committee to develop a vision statement about creating a vibrant city and thriving economy. And we made sure we wanted to make that connection to connecting to regional and international markets, not just local markets. And then we developed 6 goals, and I won't go through all of these, but I think it's important to note that we talked about the importance to the economy, really wanting to enhance safety, which is a huge issue for us as an agency, and then wanted to make sure we were hitting on equity, which is an important City of Seattle goal, and the environment, what your last panel was just talking about. In fact, one of the actions that our climate action plan identified back in 2013 was developing a freight master plan as a way to kind of improve the environment. And so we wanted to make sure we were capturing that as well. And then we also tried to align the goals in the plan with our broader strategic plan, which is called Move Seattle, that we worked with Mayor Murray on and issued last year. And I think the policies align pretty well there. We then did a lot of work, and I won't go through this in detail, looking at all of the existing conditions and meaning what are all the assets out there for freight in the City of Seattle. So we had an existing major truck street network, which was frankly really old. It was designated back in the 80s. We had a set of over-legal routes that we had identified over the years. We, as you know, worked with the port to develop the heavy haul network, so we wanted to make sure we incorporated that. We tried to document where all the important Port of Seattle facilities were in the city, where major shipyards were, intermodal rail facilities, and of course the King County Airport, Sea-Tac Airport not being in the City of Seattle, which is why we didn't include it. And then we did a lot of research on where are trucks moving through the city. And we looked at actually 4 years of data, 4 years of truck counts that we mapped. And it was really the first time we had ever done that to show where truck flows were happening. And then we looked at all the forecasted growth out to 2035, which is a time horizon for our comprehensive plan update, and looked at the different land use sectors, many of which generate more freight. And we kind of forecasted that on the street system, so you can kind of see that freight is moving all throughout the city and is forecasted to continue to do so. You see a lot of lines converging in the Duwamish-Mick, not surprisingly, because there's major truck volumes on a lot of those streets. Just to note that that gray line that you see moving north and south, that's I-5, and if we put that in green, it would have just, essentially dwarfed the whole city. And then you see I-90 and 520 represented too. So a lot of trucks moving throughout the city, doing a lot of different things, both getting to and from port facilities and industrial areas, but also delivering goods all throughout the city to our business districts.
On that slide, is the gray, is the width of the gray line to scale and related to volume?
It is. Yes.
So I-5 more so than I-90?
Yes, very much so. So then what we did is we took our, frankly, a little bit out-of-date truck street, which only really had one designation called major truck streets, and we looked at best practices around the country, and we decided we wanted to both expand our freight network and look at the different roles that different streets had in the network. So we developed, working very closely with our committee, a 4-tiered designation. So the first being essentially limited access routes, which is essentially the interstate and state system, right? They have an important role to play. We don't really control the design standards for those, but we wanted to call them out separately. Then we did want to keep and expand the major truck streets. Those are really about the major delivery routes to the interstate system, to the mix. Then we really created a new designation, which we called minors truck streets, which was really intended to kind of build resiliency into the system and also make sure we had really good deliveries to our business districts. And then last, but certainly not least, is our first last mile connectors, which are really the important access routes to major industrial centers and port facilities. And even though those are often very short segments, they often have very high truck volumes. So, the last mile connector to, T5 has, 1,000 truck trips a day, for example. So actually some of our highest volume routes are in that designation. So this is our network, and you may, and in fact, I'll go back to this earlier slide, that, the blue lines on there are the major truck streets network we have now. This is our new network, as you see, which is much more expansive than the current network is, and in the different colors are the different tiers. And I want to point out that trucks can be and are on many streets in Seattle that aren't on this network, right? And we recognize that and we say that right up front. Really, the purpose for us in identifying a network is so that we can direct investments and improvements to those streets and ensure that there really are reliable freight connections and networks to the regional markets and local business districts. So directing future investments is a really important part of this network. I'm going to turn it over to Gabriela to kind of finish the presentation at this point.
Okay, thanks. And so, as Kevin mentioned, we've been doing a lot of community outreach throughout the entire process. After we developed our draft freight network, we held 2 open houses just to, provide opportunity to receive input and for people to tell us whether, there were streets that were missing or maybe streets that should not be there and were there. We also kept going to modal advisory boards for the city and, neighborhood groups, any opportunity where we could go out and talk about the freight network and provide also an opportunity to educate about freight movement throughout the city. We went to district councils and also to industrial associations. And what you see on the right is just one of, a sample of our, one-pagers. And these are just some of the things that we've heard throughout the entire process. People want us to develop a resilient and connected freight network. Urban deliveries is something that we keep hearing again and again and again. The challenges of delivering urban goods, not only to downtown Seattle, but throughout the city. Loading and unloading, it's, a major issue. We've also heard about concerns about truck parking, especially on residential streets. Our stakeholders want us to provide broader knowledge and understanding of how goods move throughout the city. So these are just some of the comments that we've heard. And then we talk about plan implementation. We have identified over 50 projects in the Freight Master Plan. Some of those projects were the ones that were included on the Freight Access Project that Jerry mentioned at the beginning of this presentation. So from that effort, we have, more than 30. The plan implementation also talks about how we can develop strategies and actions that, are specific to freight and how it can benefit freight movement throughout the city. We're also developed design guidelines, and this just talks about, design to accommodate and move freight safely throughout the city of Seattle. We also talk about funding strategy and how we can prioritize some of these freight projects. And then strategies and actions basically will be guiding us on how we can achieve progress on the Freight Master Plan. What you see on the right are just some examples, and we have a lot of strategies under each goal. So what you see on the right, I'll just give an example, is under safety. Develop a comprehensive freight education program. And this is just important because, sometimes there's not enough knowledge of what freight does for our local economy or how freight moves throughout the city. Under environment, I'll just, talk about another one, reduce greenhouse gases produced by freight. And this basically is kind of coming from our climate action agenda. Also, the strategies and actions will inform the FMP and how we can implement the plan.
And this, I think what we now have the bicycle master plan and also a pedestrian master plan currently, don't we?
Yes.
So are these plans all looking towards each other and making sure they work together? Because when you talk to a truck driver, they're concerned about pedestrians and bicyclists and the safety issue.
So one of the things that we did, we actually mapped all the networks that we have for each of the plans. And so there is definitely overlap in some segments, but we really tried hard where, there is overlap where that either, let's just say the bicycle master plan, where, bike lanes are either, separate facilities or parallel facilities. A lot of our freight network overlaps with the transit network, which actually is good, because some of the design needs, are the same for both. So yeah, so we are looking into how the modal plans overlap.
Thank you.
Uh-huh.
Commissioner Feldman?
So one of the challenges we have is, our Seaport Alliance has put support wearing two hats, and some of the identification of solutions for the truck traffic along Marginal and stuff. The Terminal 25 as a potentially expanded parking lot for both tractors and trailers, where right now we just have the tractors parked on a small portion of it. And I'm just wondering, did you have folks from the Alliance able to speak to that, and were you able to see the proposed changes we were putting forward for the Terminal 5 EIS? Because that affected both bike paths and other things like that. I was just...
Yeah, I believe Christine Wolf is
Yeah.
part of the Freight Committee, and she's with the Alliance now?
Yeah, so Jerry and Christine have attended basically all of our meetings and have actually also attended some of the public events that we have attended or have hosted. So they have provided not only attendance, but feedback as well that has been incorporated into the FMP.
And then specific to your question, Commissioner Fellerman, the work on the T5 EIS has really been since a lot of the work was done on the FMP, so we are working with other parts of the city and can fold that in here as appropriate, but it hasn't been repped into the master plan.
So,
Commissioner Albrecht?
Yeah, I have a similar kind of line of questioning, or just maybe I'm just curious. So, recently with the state transportation package, we've secured funding for some major projects that are important to our gateway, completing 509, particularly to the Seattle Harbor. And I'm wondering how much this plan incorporates the potential changes in the freight movement patterns as a result of the fact that 509 south of the airport will be intersecting I-5 and becomes another reasonable corridor to the industrial area where we have this heavy concentration. And one, is that factored in? And then two, kind of a related question, most plans, and I'm not sure if this one is similar, tend to work within some constraints, right? You have to somehow constrain the problem that you're working on. Are there elements that are basically working outside those constraints to say, yeah, but what if? If so, this is where we have the biggest problem. Are there some things that we could be introducing that would be somewhat positively disruptive infrastructure that really changes the patterns in good ways? And how do you get to those kinds of things and gin them up for the many conversations that would have to be involved in order to kind of vet them and create the political will to actually do something?
Okay, so I'll answer the first question about identifying, movements or changes. So what we did basically, we did the analysis of the current freight network or the proposed network, and then we looked at all the near-term improvements or existing improvements, not only within the city of Seattle, but kind of just across the border to see how it would affect. And based on that, we identified gaps on the proposed freight network. And those gaps are basically like what we came out with were the 50 projects, how to improve conditions on those gaps where we have no improvements. So to answer to your question, yes, we did look at like just the border, what is happening just across the borders because, the city is not isolated.
And I think, but your second question is actually a great question, and I think it's something that keeps me up at night generally as a transportation planner generally, because I think we're heading into a world where the way people and goods move is going to look really different, probably 10, 15, 20 years from now, in ways that we can't really fully anticipate, with growth in shared mobility, with growth in automated vehicles, both for freight and for the way people move around. So I think, we tried to anticipate and note some of those trends in the plan. I don't know that anybody has done a great job of predicting or knowing what those are going to look like. Another element to your question that's come up is we kind of did our forecasted truck flow map that I showed. But that's based on an assumption that truck growth grows essentially based on kind of how it looks now. But if we move more within the city to more smaller trucks and fewer larger trucks, that means more trucks, right? It means that flow map is going to grow. The types of trucks may look very different. So I think we tried to note a lot of those trends. I think as those trends start to play out, though, I think that's why we try to update all of these plans every 5 to 7 years, just for that reason. So, for example, we did a bicycle master plan in 2007 that I would say by 2011 was almost completely obsolete. That's kind of how fast best practices and design standards had changed. So we updated it, and I assume we'll do the same thing with this plan for all those reasons.
Yeah, thank you. Great answers, both.
Commissioner Fellman?
Well, one of the strategic freight corridors that I'm painfully familiar with is 15th and Ballard Bridge, and one of the last ones that ST3 is going to get to. And there's very expensive solutions proposed, and something that I've been exploring with Representative Tarleton is the idea of potentially making better use of the heavy rail, even as an interim measure, like between King Street and, Golden Gardens or Shulshul, where, we have, and you have Expedia in the middle, and you have the Sculpture Garden, you have a lot of public lands, and we're just looking at, landings to be able to get people around 15th, and which is a really critical freight corridor for the service industry to the maritime realm. And I'm just wondering, I've brought this up at various forums, and people want tunnels and major encouraging things that we would like to get to eventually, but has there been any exploration of, I always thought when ST first came up, we'd start getting people used to taking trains, because we're not a very train culture initially. But we've really, and just as a fond of the side, that there's been a tremendous amount of infrastructure development with BNSF because of the coal and oil business that is rapidly fading. And so we have more sidings, better infrastructure, and I think they would be perhaps more responsive to maybe not gouging us as badly for passenger use. So I'm just wondering, has that been explored?
It's a really interesting question. Not to my knowledge. I mean, we have worked on ST3 alignment planning, and the issues that we have raised in the context of doing the freight master plan, because you're right, that's an incredibly important freight corridor, is to make sure that as ST3 builds out, that the alignment is not done in a way that compromises the street operations of 15th, and I think Sound Transit has heard that. I know that when Sound Move was adopted, there was a provisional commuter rail station in Ballard that has never been built, and I think that was, and that would be maybe part of the way of maybe starting to advance that discussion. So I don't know of any other discussions other than the provisional commuter rail station in Ballard where that's use of the heavy rail corridor has been thought about, but I could certainly bring it back to talk about it with folks in SDOT.
And just to continue, so this is where we are now. We are in the public comment period. We released the plan on May 23rd, and it's open for a comment period for 45 days, so comments end July 8th. We've distributed hard copies to just public libraries, and so it's available for all the residents of Seattle and outside of Seattle to provide us feedback, which we have been receiving. The plan is also available online, and we have continued to go just outside to meetings wherever it's possible, like to continue to, provide information on the plan and the opportunity for feedback. And what you can see now is just the calendar. What I talked about before is the comment period. We expect to take about a month or 5 weeks to incorporate all the comments into the revised plan that will be submitted by the mayor to the council, and we hope to achieve that in mid-August. And I would just open it for additional questions now.
Commissioner Albro?
Just a quick question. In the complete document, do you identify dependencies or interdependencies? So certainly the freight network has a dependency on land use decisions, and one of the questions I know that is really before all of us, but particularly led by the city given its land use jurisdiction, is industrial lands policy. And so it just seems to me we got to call out very specifically those things where there's interdependencies, so that as we grapple with other questions, we consider where the tentacles of relationship weave.
Yeah, I mean, it's a great question. And so when we do all of our transportation plans, we recognize that they are informed by land use, and they also can sometimes inform land use too.
Right.
So we, in actually the body of the plan, in our policy framework section, we actually talked about specifically, we listed a number of policies in the current comp plan about industrial lands and land use policy. We did not explicitly reference the new work that's starting, this new, I think, committee that's going to be looking at industrial lands. And that probably would be a good thing to reference in the final plan, but we do document the location of all of our mix, urban centers, urban villages, and then a number of the policies in the comp plan that relate to land use in the document. If at such time there's changes to those, and that's obviously subject to future actions that council happens, and we may have to go back and tweak the freight plan accordingly, but I think we did try to make that connection in the document.
Yeah, and I appreciate that, and I think it's a delicate matter, and I recognize, there's many different opinions, but one of the things that we saw play out, and not to shoot this horse, it's not dead yet, but I'm going to put another bullet in, I think, hopefully, this dead horse. And I'm talking about the arena conversation, because one of the things that played out there was some really significant concerns on the part of key members of the legislature, because there had been state investments in infrastructure to accommodate, freight-dependent facilities handling freight, like our terminals. And so when the city's grappling with a land use decision, sometimes those who've been, developing freight master plans or kind of contributing here or funding other infrastructure projects, they want to make sure, I think, that at the front of the conversation are the many sunk costs and investments over the years around the land uses that have already been established, outside of just their current jobs and their economic impact. But, do we want to throw away the millions and millions of dollars of investment? And so I'm just trying to figure out if this plan helps kind of tee up that conversation so it can be more productive in a holistic way for policymakers who are looking to kind of, weave through all the questions.
It's a good question, and we certainly, as you might expect, heard about the arena issue when we were developing this plan. And I think what we frankly tried to do was base the freight master plan and the mobility improvements identified it on the city's existing land use policies and decisions that have been made to date. Recognizing that certainly sometimes those decisions can change. But so I don't know to what extent this plan may help inform additional conversations about things like that, but I think we tried to make that really clear nexus between land use and transportation in the plan, and we could certainly try to strengthen that if that could be one of the comments we get from the board.
And so I guess I'll suggest that to our staff. I think one of the places that we can make comment is in the mayor's recommended plan to identify those relationships and other investments that have a connection to why this is the master plan, and so as to tie this all together and tee it up right up front in terms of the recommendation. I think that would strengthen the ability for policymakers to grapple with the bigger questions.
All right. Commissioner Feldman?
I just would like to second the mention by Commissioner Albro that I welcome the opportunity to be working with the city in this collaborative constructive fashion, and that in the industrial lands report this is where we will see in the next plan, will we see how well these two integrate, right? And so if in the course of doing the industrial lands policy, we see that there may be things that are contrary in the aspirational goals of the freight master plan, that's a moment to really see which side has to give a little bit. But I think in having us both at the table with the surrounding communities this is a real opportunity to get our alignment together, and I think this is only positive things could come from that.
Yeah, and I would agree with that. And just to, I mean, the city is a large organization, but we don't work in silos. So we in SDOT plan to be involved with the industry, even though that's not being led by SDOT. We plan to be involved with that work and bring that perspective.
Commissioner Bowman.
I know that we're running really short on time. Just a quick question since we have you here. Are there any changes anticipated to the Holgate corridor?
I mean, you mean like structural changes, or we're not proposing
Shutting down Holgate,
No,
or making any changes
that's-
besides hopefully repaving it would be fantastic.
Yeah, no, it's not, that's not on the plan.
Okay, just want to make sure. Thank you.
All right. Further comments or questions? Well, Kevin and Gabrielle, thank you so much for taking the time to come down here today. And I understand that the industrial and freight community are not shy about voicing our opinions. And I want to thank you for, at times in the past, frankly, we haven't had a voice. And so, last 10, 20 years, we've become much more adamant about having a seat at the table, making our voice heard. But that said, really delighted with the direction the city has taken in terms of moving forward this freight master plan. And I believe that once it is finalized, I think we'll be one of the few major cities in the U.S. with a freight master plan. So that's wonderful. Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
All right, with that, I know we're running a little bit behind schedule, but if we could take a hard 5-minute break, and I'll call everyone back here by 4:25, I would like to call a 5-minute recess. Afternoon, everyone. This is Port of Seattle Commission President John Creighton reconvening the regular meeting of the Port of Seattle Commission for June 28th, 2016. The time is now 4:25 p.m. Mr. Fick.
And President Creighton, you did it. Way to go. Okay, we have 2 action items remaining on our agenda today. The next one's item 6B, the authorization for the Chief Executive Officer to increase authorized funds for the airport dining and retail infrastructure modification project in the amount of $7,325,000 and to transfer $1.5 million of budget from baggage optimization back to ADR. Total ADR infrastructure modification project authorization would be $21,278,000. Our presenters today are Jim Schoen and Sean Anderson. Gentlemen.
Good afternoon, Commissioners, CEO Fick. As we mentioned to you at our May 17th meeting, we are back in front of you today to ask for an increase in the authorized budget for this project. In the interest of time, I'm going to skip ahead to the following slide. This slide illustrates the major cost changes to the project as shown in the middle column. We have categorized these as infrastructure validation, which includes items affected by changing assumptions that we made initially, level of service changes, which are in part responding to growth, and program soft cost increases, which I'll speak to in a little more in a further slide. As we undertook design, we took a more thorough look at the assumptions underlying the scope of work for the project. We went back and reviewed the requirements of these individual unit infrastructure needs, such as new water, power, and drainage. We determined that some early fundamental assumptions made by the team had proven invalid, and that, as you can see outlined in the slide, some of the changes that we've had to make.
So just to put that in layman's language, what we have to do, one of the things we recognized, I think, in past ADR efforts is that putting all of the infrastructure requirements on the tenants, i.e. the long runs back to where they might be able to tie into water or waste or what have you, is onerous, and it is better for us to be more programmatic about that and actually make that an airport cost and then recoup that through the lease rates over time, right?
Yes, correct.
And this is saying that basically we underestimated the work that we had to do to ready the units.
Correct, correct. We also had, due to the rapid growth in traffic that the airport has experienced in the past few years, the project has had to make changes to increase the level of service to the traveling public. An example includes adding new dining locations on Concourse D that were not in the original plan. So on this slide, we find the largest lessons that we have learned. It involved how we estimated the project staff and support costs. We anticipated a standard project spending pattern where our planning efforts would occur early in the project and then taper off once design commenced. Now we understand that each phase of the project will need additional planning efforts to schedule, design, and construction efforts. And so we've made those adjustments in the budget. We thought we had a plan that was going to work for the entire project. As we made changes to the leasing groups, we had to go back and revise that plan. These efforts needed the support of a consultant project manager as well. So staff had prepared numerous scenarios to resequence the leasing and construction, and each required a review of construction, scheduling, and costing, something we had not planned or budgeted to undertake when we prepared the original estimate.
So if I could just quickly ask, I would assume that as we have thoughtfully and wisely, I think, gone down the path of creating more smaller opportunities that would be creating opportunities for disadvantaged businesses and small businesses and help the ADR program kind of reflect our community and our character in the Northwest, that also then, just that decision has in and of itself certain soft costs associated with it, because we've got more tenant projects that need to be coordinated. Right now we have more actors,
Yes.
more distinct projects, and so these are some of the consequences of those decisions.
Yes, yes, indeed. And so this slide will help place this capital project in the context of the overall ADR renewal program. And it illustrates how our $21 million capital project fits together with what we anticipate as tenant investments and then as well port support costs for their tenant projects for a total program of $90 to $95 million overall. And at this point, I'd like to turn the microphone over to Jim Schoen for the next slide.
Commissioners, good afternoon. I'm Jim Schoen, Director of Business Development. Despite the increase in costs that Sean just described, the projected financial performance of the ADR program redevelopment is still quite strong, as you see there with both the internal rate of return and the net present value. The investments are key to accomplishing the goals that you set for us in the 2012 and 2014 airport dining and retail motions, which were growing employment in the ADR program by 40%, growing the share of sales generated by small, local, disadvantaged businesses to 40%, growing the sales per employment by at least 40%, and growing revenues to the port by 50%. With that, we recommend approval of this item and would be happy to answer any questions you have.
Right. Comments or questions from the commission? Do I have a motion for approval?
I'll move approval of item 6B.
Great, thank
I'll
you, Commissioner.
second.
Thank you, Commissioner Albert, and thank you, Commissioner Bowman, for the second. Commissioner Gregoire?
Yeah, I swear I won't take us off topic, but Commissioner Albert and I had an interesting experience today. We had a cup of coffee. We went to go dispose of his compostable holder for his turkey sandwich. There was nowhere to dispose of it appropriately. I just want to make sure we are aligning our ADR upgrade, as we've talked about, on environmentally sustainable. We've got the landfill, recycling, there's something else, and I don't remember what it was, but it wasn't compostable. And we need to make sure that we're doing this so that everyone knows this is our commitment and it's part of this experience.
thank you for that feedback, because we have previously talked about this, and the team is hard at work on this. And just so I'm clear on this, it wasn't that the signage about where to put it was incorrect or misleading. It was just that there was no place to put what you understood to be a compostable container.
Exactly. The Hudson News coffee stand right out here, there was no compostable bin.
Okay.
And I guess the thing I would also say, now we are off topic.
I know.
Number one, that turkey sandwich was really good. But secondly, I do think we need to work with the folks in our ADR program to make sure that the containers they're using actually fit in the holes that we make available in our receptacles, because that creates a mess. So, all right. For what it's worth.
Well, and Jim, to that point, there is provision in the RFP in terms of scoring for recyclable and reusable containers. And
Yes.
We got to align the infrastructure to that. No more off topic.
All right, so Commissioner Albro has moved, Commissioner Bowman has seconded. All in favor of moving this item, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
The motion, any nays? Hearing none. The motion passes unanimously with Commissioner Fellman being absent. Mr. Fick.
Thank you.
Okay, our last action item today is item 6C. It's the authorization for the Chief Executive Officer to increase the North Terminal's utilities upgrade project scope to include creation of a piping loop to provide redundancy, increase the project budget by $11,385,000, for a revised total budget of $21,335,000. Increase authorization by $7,271,000 for a new total of $9,271,000. Utilize port crews and small works contracts to perform construction work, and authorize the advertisement and award major works construction contract that will install the time-critical sections of the utility tunnels portion of the project. Our presenters today are Mike Tasker and Brad Benson. Gentlemen.
Senior Manager of Facilities and Infrastructure. I'm here with Brad Benson, the project manager for this project. The North Terminal's Utilities Upgrade Project will address a critical infrastructure capacity problem with our heating and cooling systems at the north end of the airport. They're primarily driven by growth. The solution to the problem is also the scope of the project. This project will improve the heating, ventilation, and air conditioning HVAC services for both C&D concourses, the planned expansion of the North Satellite, and also provide capacity of SAMP terminals up north. We're going to double the capacity or double the diameter of the pipe, which improves the capacity by 4 times. R squared area. Math. The other thing this project will do is provide an interconnected system between the north loop, or the north part of the system, and the south and west part of the systems. That will increase the reliability, provide the ability to do maintenance, and shut down the system without impacting the rest of the north part of the airport. So it's critical to include the loop into the project. And with that, I'll turn over to Brad to talk specific details.
Good afternoon, Commissioner CEO Fick. I'm Brad Benson. I'm the project manager. Last April, when we came to you with this project for design authorization, one of the provisions in our memorandum was that if we found during design discovery that it made sense to add the interconnecting loop, we would come to you at that time with that proposal and a cost estimate. Well, we've reached that conclusion. At our 15% design submittal, we realized that it was necessary and critical to install the connecting loop. So if I orient you to the diagram, the green line is the interconnecting loop that will connect the system to the rest of the interconnecting loop. The red line is the new section of piping that we're going to install that supports the HVAC upgrades on the C&D concourse out to the North Satellite and then on to anything that happens north of the airport. So what we have to do now, in realizing the design discovery in coordination with the baggage optimization team, there are 2 critical areas that need to be constructed very fast. And that are the 2 purple boxes on the diagram above that are on the green leg of the interconnecting loop. We need to install those utility tunnels today as fast as we can in design and construction so that we're out of the way of the baggage optimization program. We understand that that is one of the most critical programs here at the airport. We cannot interfere with it, so we need to get started immediately, if not sooner. We actually have a design team set to start immediately. We've leaned as far forward as we can and waiting for your authorization.
Commissioner Bowman?
Well, given the sense of urgency, I'd be happy to move this item.
And I'm going to second it. I'm just going to say slides like this are what get me up in the morning. Good
Oh,
job.
my God.
All right, Commissioner Bowman moves, Commissioner Albro seconds. Agenda item 6C.
Can I critique Commissioner
and
Albro's
Commissioner
comments?
Gregoire is going to take us off topic.
Yep. That's my plan. No. Go forth. You're good.
Okay. All right, all in favor of this agenda item, item 6C, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
All opposed? Hearing none, the motion passes, or the item passes unanimously, with Commissioner Feldman being absent. Mr. Fick.
President Creighton, we have a couple of briefings today. Item 7A, 2 additional international aircraft gates at the International Arrival Facility to meet growing rapid growth. Our presenter today is Lance Little, supported by Mike Ale.
Thank you, CEO Fick. Good afternoon, Commissioners. As all of you are aware, we currently have a, I guess, somewhat dated international arrivals facility at this point in time. The good news is we are in the midst of a plan to replace that facility. The plan, however, has 2 phases, phase 1, phase 2, and Mike is going to get into the details of those phases. What we're asking is for us to expedite or accelerate a particular section of phase 2 that would provide us with 2 additional wide-body gates ahead of schedule. Now, why are we asking for this? If you look at the forecast that we have right now, if you look at the number of new airlines and international passengers that we anticipated or we forecasted, and if you look at where we are with our actual numbers, we are way ahead of the forecast. Now, this is good news in terms of us meeting our one of our century agenda goals way ahead of schedule, but it provides certain challenges at this point in time. And this, we currently have an opportunity to accelerate a section of phase 2 of this project and provide 2 additional gates. Currently, we are behind the curve. We have been behind the curve for a long while. And as Mike will show you, once we complete phase 1 of this project, as it is planned, we will have 18 gates and we will need 18 gates. It will basically put us, as I describe it, at the curve, but we have an opportunity to get ahead of the curve by getting these 2 additional gates. Some of the things that we are observing right now is we are holding passengers in aircrafts or in the passageway after a long 14-hour, 12-hour flight because we just don't have the gates or the international arrivals facility in place in order to accommodate them. And again, as I said, this gives us an opportunity to provide these 2 wide-body gates. Also want to mention that we have a plan as part of the SAMP that you have seen on multiple occasions to add additional wide-body gates as part of Terminal B, right? But that will not happen right now. That would be a part of the SAMP process. The maximum that we could get right now is the 2 additional gates on A, and that's what we're going to be requesting. Let's see if there's anything before handing over.
And Lance, could you say that again?
So the current plan gives us 18 wide-body gates, right? Phase 2 of the project would have given us 2 more, which would take us to 20. What we want to do is to accelerate that and get 20 right now as part of phase 1
But are you
versus
saying
waiting
that
for phase
if we
2.
wanted to, because really, I mean, we're doing this, I understand, because by the time we build out,
We're behind the
yeah,
curve.
capacity.
Yes, we will be.
So why not, not just leave it at 2 gates, but 4 gates or 6 gates? Do we have the physical?
Well, we have an opportunity to actually get the additional 2 gates in place without impacting the current schedule for the international arrival facilities. It would be very difficult for us to start doing any planning, design, and construction and B right now. We'd have to wait until the SAMP is completed. So the best we can probably do right now is to get those 2 additional gates to take us up to 20.
Because my colleagues and port staff probably be sick of hearing this from me, but you haven't been here. I mean, you've only been here for a short while, but you know, certain events as a commissioner really imprint on you. And one of the things, and Commissioner Gregoire and I were just talking about this earlier this morning, but when I think I was a year into being, or less than a year into being a commissioner, and we had the project to go forward, the proposal to go forward with the Smith Cove Cruise Terminal project, and yet the projected cost really exceeded the amount that we could really, that we wanted in terms of the overall project cost. So we set staff to do some value engineering. And one of the things that was value engineered out of the project was a freight elevator. And at the time, that made sense because we were trying to get the project costs down. But now it's really impacted the full utilization of that terminal because when it's not cruise season, you know, we'd love to use it for events and whatnot, but because it doesn't have a freight elevator, it's really inhibited the use of that terminal for other. So long story short, when we were looking at this last year, I really impressed upon airport staff, let's not be penny wise and pound foolish. You know, if we're looking to save costs, let's not cut useful bits and pieces out of the project. And then, you know, lo and behold, we decided we didn't need those 2 gates at that time, and now we do. So I guess I'm just interested, you know, since we'll be at capacity anyway, even with those 2 gates once we finish.
Well, we'll be a little bit ahead, but not for long. And that Commissioner, you raise a very important point. One of the things we do with all the projects that we're undertaking is we not just look at the initial capital investment required for the project. We look at the total cost of ownership for the entire project, and that is very important as well.
Can I jump in here on this slide? 'Cause just I have not mentally split it up this way. So I'm trying to understand phase 1 underway, 608 million, going up to 648 million if we make this expansion. What are we talking about in phase 2? Are we talking about how SAMP dovetails into the IAF? What am I have not thought about phase 2.
If I could maybe, and then I'll have you go into the details. So as one of the things as phase 1, right, the current facility or the initial facility was designed to handle, I think, 900 passengers per hour. Then that was increased to 1,200 passengers per hour. Phase 1 that we're undertaking will handle 1,900 passengers per hour, and then phase 2 will handle 2,600 passengers per hour. One of the challenges we have right now is that on certain days during peak, we're seeing 2,300 passengers per hour. So that's part of the phase 1, phase 2, and also the baggage belt. I'll ask Mike to get into some of the details.
I think we didn't really talk about it in phase 1, phase 2, Commissioner Gregoire. I think that's why you're drawing a little bit of a blank, but it was always anticipated that we knew it was sort of like building a skeleton of where the gates were going to be so that we had the ability to build out, but was never really called phase 2. So I think that's where the discount, we always knew we were going to need the additional gates. We were going to build the shell of it and fill it in, and you're saying we need to do that sooner.
Yes, this is an opportunity to do it, and we need to take advantage of that opportunity to get the 2 additional gates.
Does this help if I expedite those 2 into phase 1? What's striking me in this slide is phase 2 budget and schedule not yet established. Are we talking greenfield? Or are we talking about something I've never heard of, is where I'm trying to go with?
That's a great question. Great question, Commissioner Gregoire. Phase 1 and Phase 2, as Lance indicated here, really, from a project standpoint, were viewed as being the shell, as Commissioner Bowman talked about for the processing facility, the number of gates that were available to access that processor, and then really the baggage makeup that was in that. And so we have found, by working very closely with the team, that now what remains of Phase 2 is literally 2 remaining baggage carousels and these 2 gates that are connected via the sterile corridor. So we found a way to incorporate that additional shell space into the original design. It'll be in Phase 1 in the $608 million. So if you think about it, what we need really to get from 1900 to 2600 are these 2 contact gates and the 2 baggage carousels. And we're also working very closely with the team currently to see if we can get a 6th carousel into the original 608 budget, but that's not been completely defined yet.
Yep. And so in any case, it seems to me that the staff recommendation is going to be to eliminate the phases and accelerate all this full scope of the project under one.
Yeah, from a high level, Commissioner. As I say, there may be some other elements that I'm not, detailing right now, but it essentially broke down into the gates, baggage carousels, and shelf space. So I just wanted to reiterate that back in July of 2014, when I came before this body, I was asked directly if I would give a recommendation to include 2 additional gates at that time. Of course, at that time, we were very concerned about the preliminary budget, and we made the recommendation in concert with Commissioner Albro being the sponsor for the project to wait until we had better estimates and then readdress this question with the commission. And I think that my opinion as stated that day was, yes, we need the gates. That's only been emboldened by the fact that we're up 5% year-to-date with international traffic. We're up 10% in passenger volume. We're up 11% in operations. And we've had 454 holds for passengers arriving internationally this year. Last year we had 700. We're at 454 already this year. The vast majority of those are hold-in corridors, only 1 on board the aircraft, but there have been a number of hold for gates as well, which will be exacerbated next year by the removal of gates from inventory as we get into the construction. So we've got a real challenge ahead of us. The good news is we have conducted 4 international hardstand arrival operations this year with Condor from Frankfurt. They were volunteers to this. They said we hardstand at departure point in Frankfurt. So, this is a good opportunity for us to hardstand. We have also given reduced fees for those, so we're charging just $100 for those arrivals. So they see a benefit of perhaps $700 or $800 per flight on that arrival. That's been agreed to by the Airline Airport Affairs Committee. And those 4 hardstand operations have gone well. Of course, it's been in good weather, and we've had everything behind us. But next year, when we take gates out of service, we're looking at much greatly increased hardstand numbers for international. So we're working with the airlines currently to form a consortium, perhaps, and look at some other options to see who is best prepared to facilitate these hardstand operations going forward. I also wanted to just include a summary slide here that Lance talked about. So when we were here in 2014, at that time we had 12 gates, or 12 operations searching for 11 gates. With the support of the commission, we were able to bring on a 12th international accessible gate last year. But now we have 15 flights at peak with 12 gates in service. And as you look forward, those bottom numbers, flights during peak, are increasing due to the interest of international carriers coming to Kazuya Shiwata and saying, they have interest in Seattle, we'd like to be here. And so those are our very conservative projections of perhaps 3 additional carriers that are interested in serving Seattle between now and the opening of the International Arrivals Facility.
Can I jump in there since summer 2019 terrifies me? If I had another row, what's the number of hard stands? Is that 4? Do we expanding to 6? Do we have a vision on that side?
Yeah, so when we go into construction next year, we'll be removing 4 gates from service, 2 at Concourse A for the bridge construction and then the sterile corridor construction, as well as 2 at the South Satellite for construction of the bridge landing on that end. North Star separately is anticipated to take out as many as 5 gates, so we could be down a total of 9 gates at peak construction activity. And those, theoretically, we're going to gate the international wide bodies first, but it will result in a great number of hardstands, both domestically and internationally. The good news is that through April, May, and June of this year, our hardstand attrition rate has been in the low 90% range, meaning that while we've identified perhaps 400 or more hardstand operations in those months, the airlines, upon knowing that, have taken other mitigations. So they will hold for gate, they'll change their schedule, they'll move gates around, and so we've been very, very lucky to date. However, we've got a full gate complement now, and what's going to change really is next year we're going to take those gates out of service. So we work with the carriers every single month when we get the advanced schedule to say, what the gate deficit's going to be, and then they self-help, if you will. But the real test is going to come next spring when we start taking these gates out of service for IAF.
And Lance and Mike, I support moving forward with this agenda item when it comes before us. I understand the port's desire in the past to be very prudent and conservative with building out infrastructure, because anything we do puts costs on our airline partners. I just want to emphasize I'm a little bit frustrated in that, last year when we were going through this, I said, let's not cut the project in ways, let's not cut costs by reducing capacity. And it was a long, involved process to get all the airlines comfortable with the funding strategy for this international arrivals hall. And now we're saying we're going to add $41 million to the project cost. And I understand, we've had initial conversations with the airlines, but that, who knows? I mean, commissioners were really being heavily lobbied a year ago on these funding issues, and I thought we had put it to bed. And now, we're doing something that could reopen this whole debate, and I just wish we had gone forward initially with the original plan to include these two gates as part of the initial project.
Well, and I think it's only fair for me to take some ownership of this. This is, consider this my freight elevator moment in this project.
They need to listen to all 5 commissioners, and I made my voice clear.
No, and I appreciate that. And, I think I just didn't want staff to have to stand alone on this. When we were looking at scoping it out, I mean, your point is exactly right and well made. We can be penny wise and pound foolish, especially when we're doing the political work to kind of get everybody, in the same place. What's really overtaken us? So first off, why this? This was an easy thing to carve out that didn't actually, have high penalties to being able to introduce back in later. So it made sense, kind of shell it out and then, address it if the market really proved to be there. Just that nobody anticipated it would be now so soon. And so it's really the underlying strength of our marketplace and the demand for service that kind of accelerates this. I still don't think it was a bad decision to have carved it out before, because nobody's got a crystal ball in terms of where we're going to be. And I think that in the end of the day, as we grow passengers and we grow volumes and flights and other things, these costs are distributed over all of those flights and over the volume. And so that's a mitigating impact. That doesn't necessarily mean that it's going to assuage the fears or concerns of the various competing airlines, but I think I think we can stand on the work that we've already done. But your point is well made, and I just didn't want Mike to have to sit there and take it alone, because I was part of, I signed off on this as a good way for us to go. And so I'll stand by that, yeah.
Okay.
I would like to close then, Commissioners, if there is no further questions. This is a day in the life last Monday on June 20th. Here you can count 14 wide bodies on the ground at one point. So this is a very real situation before us today, and we appreciate your support going forward.
Thank you.
Not to belittle the utility team, but this is easier for me to digest than that other graphic. Thank you.
All right. Well, thank you, Lance. Thank you, Mike.
Thanks, Lance.
Thank you for your
Mike.
support.
President Creighton, item 7B is a report on property insurance renewal for policy year beginning July 1st, 2016. The presentation materials have been provided in advance, and if there are no questions, I'd like to proceed on to item 7C.
Does this come before us again, this report? Can I ask 2 questions that we can do a written follow-up on, if that makes sense? On the
This was just a briefing
insurance.
today.
Will it come before us again? No. It will not.
It will not.
Here's my question. The briefing materials note that we do not purchase earthquake insurance because it's just not, prohibitive is the right, cost prohibitive at this point. I just want to follow up on what's the best practice of other local governments and local large companies. I think we think of ourselves in the hybrid environment, and maybe you have that answer right now, and that would be very simple.
Jeff Hollingsworth is our subject matter expert. Jeff? No.
Good afternoon, Commissioners, CEO Fick. Earthquake insurance is varies quite in terms of pricing and coverage availability based on the exposure that the underwriters rate, and especially here in the Northwest, it's a very difficult coverage to place, especially for entities such as the port. Our insurable values are close to $5 billion when you take all the assets that we have between the seaport and the airport and our other properties. And the amount of capacity that is offered can be as low as $10 million. So it's not just a matter of the pricing, but it's also how much is available, and does it really make sense to only purchase, let's say, $10 or $15 million of annual earthquake coverage when the values of our exposures are so high. So when a lot of the public entities either do not purchase it, or they have alternate methods that they've used, such as building up contingency funds over a long period of time, or like one of the strategies that the port would use would be to go to FEMA in the event that we were hit with a large quake. The other difficulty is that the way they price the deductibles, a lot of times the deductibles are based on values at a location. So for example, if you look at the airport and the values that we have concentrated here, which can be in itself $2 billion, a deductible of 5% of that would have to be fulfilled before we would even be able to tap into coverage. So with the large of risk we would retain anyway by purchasing it, coupled with the low limits available of, let's say, $10, $15, $25 million, it just doesn't pan out. Some entities, when you get outside of the immediate Northwest, for example, in Portland, they do buy some earthquake coverage, Port of Portland, but they're not in the same fault zone. The Seattle fault runs right through our marine properties. And coupled with the fact that in 2001, when we had the Nisqually earthquake, we had a lot of damage. Port of Tacoma had very little damage in 2001. Our damages were roughly about $20 million that we ended up, and it was heavily on the seaport side. So that also comes into play and has kind of shied away markets that would otherwise give us the coverage.
Thank you. Thank you.
Can I just say that, Ted, I hope that we can have more of a strategy than just relying on FEMA if there is an earthquake, so for recuperation, so maybe you could consider that moving forward. I understand why we're not getting the earthquake insurance. I totally agree. I don't purchase it myself for my home, even though I'm nearby the fault as well. But yeah, just relying on FEMA doesn't seem like such a great idea. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, our final briefing today is item 7C, baggage program update. Our presenters are Greg Carey and Ed Whites.
Fick. I'm Greg Carey, the program leader for baggage, and this is Ed Whites, the project manager for the baggage optimization project. We're here today to brief you on the baggage program and specifically the baggage optimization project, because we're going to be back on July 12th to ask for construction authorization for phase 1 of that project. Hold it. That went too far. In the interest of time, where the baggage program is currently comprised of 4 elements, and we're going to focus today on the baggage optimization project.
So good afternoon, Commissioner CEO Fick. So I'm going to give you just a quick, we laid this out and tried to simplify this slide for you guys and say, let's show you kind of input, screening, sortation, makeup as our existing system is laid out in the top of the slide. And with optimization, you go from input to a centralized screening system out to sortation to a makeup, and that basically helps you get any bag anywhere in the airport. Next slide. So this is how our existing systems are laid out. You guys have seen this a few times, so that's kind of just give you a graphic of they're not interconnected. Next slide. So this is our comprehensive design of the new baggage optimization system on the left, and on the right is our phase 1 component, which is really the heart of the screening system for optimization, and that's what we're going to be focusing on And that's the request that we're going to have coming up. Next slide. So the schedule, we're trying to advertise this in fourth quarter this year, get it in construction first quarter or second quarter next year, complete the phase 1 component third quarter 2019, and then we'll be follow-on phases after that. Next slide. Then basically these slides are graphics of where we're going to be working over the next few years on the kind of how it's phased out today, and that potentially we may combine 3 and 4 in the future, but we'll be back for more briefings in the future on that. Next slide. So what I really want to point your attention to is the $24 million that were authorized to date, and then we're going to come back for $115 million action in 2 weeks. And if you got any questions, let me know.
Comments or questions?
Just a comment that, you know, this is what it looks like to maximize the utility of the terminal, to make it efficient, and, you know, so this is a capacity and service project because it just makes it all so much more workable. So I really appreciate your work on it.
Thank you.
All right. Well, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Mr. Fick.
Well, one item of new business today, I'd like to give commissioners and our stakeholders a brief look ahead regarding 4 items coming before you in the July 12th commission meeting. We will be asking you to authorize funding for 2 projects to address Sea-Tac's current record growth and forecasted growth. The first project is adding the 2 international gates, which you were just briefed on. The second project is the first contract for baggage optimization, about which you were just briefed. On July 12th, we'll also ask you to authorize funding for 2 airport-related projects to help us manage and shorten security checkpoint lines in the face of ever-growing passenger volumes. The first project is a $1.3 million expenditure for automated exit lane doors, which enable TSA staff to be redeployed to checkpoint lines. This will free up 42 TSA agents. The second project adds cameras that will enable better management, including balancing of checkpoint lines, as we establish a command control center to be able to have better intel about where the checkpoints have shorter wait lines. Those are all the new business items.
All right. Thank you, CEO Fick. Any new business from commissioners?
Just one, and I think of it as an opportunity. I know we've been very active with I'm forgetting the airport councils, not international, but the North America-based airport.
Yeah, ACIN.
Yeah. I was just thinking it's an opportunity, and based on the Salmon Safe certification, that we could brief on how we handled stormwater at some opportunity and talk about it as a best practice. And I think we could put forth the notion as an idea. I know Stewardship Partners would love to come with us. So meant to say that earlier, but new business is a good enough time.
Right. Good point. All right. Seeing no further business, the Port of Seattle Commission regular meeting for June 28th, 2016 is adjourned as of 5:04 p.m. Thank you all.